Chapter 905. He looked at me. This was truly fearsome. The cultivation technique that Zhongxian cultivated was the strongest heaven's path divine art, and he had cultivated his physical body and soul as well. For Mo Liuzhen to possess strength equaling him, could it be that his soul and physical body were equally strong as well? I truly mustn't underestimate other cultivators, Zhongxian thought in alarm. In his journey from Tianxian Kingdom, he had encountered many experts of his age, and he had always been able to overcome them easily. As time went by, a feeling of superiority had unwittingly arisen within him. However, it seemed like it was time to quell such a notion in his mind. There had always been powerful geniuses on par or even superior to him on the master-teacher continent, it was just that he had never met them before. Does Principal Zhong intend to challenge the record? School head Mo asked. Honestly speaking, he was indeed rather curious to see the clash between the new principal and Principal Mo Liuzhen back then. With the same cultivation, which of them would possess superior fighting prowess? Yuan Zhongxian nodded, confirming school head Mo's guess. His strength was at 65 million ding, which placed him on par with only a nascent Saint intermediate stage cultivator, making it doubtful whether he could clear the 7th level or not. Nevertheless, this was a good opportunity to see how he stood against the top geniuses of the master-teacher continent, as well as to see what his limit was. Besides, this was a necessary trial he would have to undertake if he wanted to clear the 6-star master-teacher examination as soon as possible. Allow me to take you there. School head Mo's eyes lit up in excitement as he offered to lead the way to the Mountain of Records. The Mountain of Records was in close proximity to the Elder Hall, and its structure was reminiscent of a towering mountain. As the duo arrived at the Mountain of Records, school head Mo began explaining more about the Mountain of Records. Our Master Teacher Academy's Mountain of Records was built by Principal Mu Kai Bak, then based on the Combat Master Tower in the Combat Master Hall. Every single level is guarded by a puppet that represents the pinnacle fighting prowess of a cultivator of that certain cultivation realm. It won't be easy to scale the Mountain of Records. This trial is extremely demanding on one's fighting prowess and battle sense. Furthermore, unlike most tests in the Master Teacher Academy, this trial is highly dangerous. Principal Zhong, you must proceed carefully inside. Dangerous? That's right. As the ones guarding the levels are puppets, they might be unable to control their strength as precisely as human cultivators. The slightest carelessness might easily place one in a lethal position, and each year, there are quite a number of master teachers who are severely injured or die in the trial. School head Mo said grimly. The Mountain of Records wasn't an easy trial to challenge. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for it to have remained unchallenged despite it being more than a month since the start of the new semester. Principal Zhong, if you faces any danger in any level, please don't hesitate to admit defeat. Once you do so, the puppets will immediately stop their offense and back down, school head Mo advised. He had deep trust in Zhongxian's capability, but in the end, the latter's cultivation was still too low. There would definitely be levels where the latter would face grave danger, so it was important to explain the rules to him thoroughly in advance. Noted. Zhongxian nodded before bidding school head Mo farewell. Without any hesitation, he began making his way into the Mountain of Records. Before long, he arrived in a room roughly a few hundred square meters large. Within the room was a puppet that possessed the cultivation of Chrysalis Realm Advanced Stage, granting its fists an incredible might exceeding 30 million ding. Finally, a new challenger. Here. With a soft chuckle, the puppet's joints cracked resoundingly before pushing its massive feet against the ground and charging right toward Zhongxian. An artifact by the Celestial Designer Hall? Even though it hasn't reached Saint Tier, it still possesses spirit. Not bad. Knowing that the other party's strength was beneath his, Zhongxian wasn't nervous in the slightest. Standing before the rampaging might of the puppet's fist, he chuckled softly. He had also encountered similar puppets in his 2-star master teacher examination back in Tianwu Kingdom, but it was obvious that the one before him was far more technologically advanced. Even though it was still a way off from becoming a Saint-tier artifact, it already possessed spirit and even sentience. If one could forge many of such puppets, one would be able to build an extremely powerful army that felt no fear nor pain. However, Considering the expensive materials and advanced skill required to build each one, that would probably be difficult to achieve. 2 breaths later, the puppet was already lying on the floor. Zhongxian walked past it and headed to the second level without any hesitation. The puppet on the second level possessed a cultivation of Chrysalis Realm Pinnacle. Naturally, it wasn't a match for him either, and he was able to defeat the other party easily. Advancing ahead, just as school head Mo had said, Zhongxian faced a half-saint primary stage puppet in the third level. However, considering how Zhongxian was able to defeat even a half-saint realm combat master like Lu Cheng shortly after achieving a breakthrough, there was no way his journey could be impeded by that half-saint primary stage puppet. Heading up the levels, Zhongxian hardly faced any impediment at all. At the bottom of the Mountain of Records, Zhao Bingshu, Wei Ranxue, and the others had also gathered in the area after hearing that Principal Zhong was going to challenge the trial. They hadn't really witnessed Principal Zhong's battle prowess for themselves, but they knew that it was likely extraordinary, given the abilities of his direct disciples, Wang Ying, Zheng Yang, and Liu Yang. How could a teacher who had the capability to groom such powerful students possibly be weak himself? Wei Ranxue couldn't help but ask her fellow peers, "How far do you think that Principal Zhong will be able to reach?" "I harbor little doubt regarding Principal Zhong's fighting prowess. Just by his comprehension of battle techniques, as well as his grasp of spearmanship, fist arts, and leg arts, he should be able to display a fighting prowess far beyond that of his cultivation realm." Back then, Principal Mo Liuzhen had reached the 7th level. "I believe that, at the very least, Principal Zhong should be able to beat his record and reach the 8th," the head of the martial arts school, Xu Changqing, said as he stroked his beard. As a martial arts fanatic, he had taken some time to study Zheng Yang's spearmanship, Wang Ying's leg art, and Liu Yang's fist art, and the conclusion he had reached after a long examination was that it would easily make them invincible among those of the same cultivation. There were no battle techniques that he could think of that could possibly rival theirs. How could a master teacher who was able to impart such powerful battle techniques possibly be weak himself? As talented as Principal Mo Liuzhen was, he also didn't manage to receive the recognition of all of the preceding principals and form the impeccable principal's seal. For Principal Zhong to achieve this unprecedented feat, there was no way his accomplishment in the Mountain of Records would be beneath that of Principal Mo Liuzhen. UN. Just like you all, I also think that Principal Zhong should be able to clear the 8th level, Zhao Bingshu said with a smile. They had harbored doubts regarding Principal Zhong's capabilities in the past, and in the end, they had suffered severe face slaps due to their underestimation of the latter. When they heard that the latter was going to challenge the Mountain of Records, they had rushed over excitedly, hoping to witness how the latter would break the record and leave behind a legend. "I also think so." School head Jiang nodded in agreement. "I think it's just a question of how long it will take teacher to reach the 9th level now." Others might be unaware of Principal Zhong's strength, but he had a clear view of it. Just in terms of comprehension of demonic tunes, the other party had already reached the level of a 7-star demonic tunist, just like him. With such prowess, the other party could easily destroy opponents of far higher cultivation realms than him. Moreover, this was unlikely to be all of his means. If he were to utilize all of them, clearing the levels would definitely be just a walk in the park. Back then, Principal Mo Liuzhen took 2 hours in order to reach the 7th level. "I think that our principal should be able to clear it within an hour. An hour? I think that's still underestimating our principal. Considering his previous records, he should be able to clear the 8th within 10 minutes and perhaps even destroy the entire Mountain of Records while he is in the midst of doing so." The head of the physician school, Zhong Dingchun, said with a bitter smile. Now that you mention it, that does seem to be possible." Hearing those words, everyone abruptly fell silent. They suddenly felt that it was a huge mistake for them to have allowed the other party to challenge the Mountain of Records. Despite the short duration that Principal Zhong had been in the Master Teacher Academy, he had challenged quite a few of trials, and wherever he had passed through, there was not a single one that had been left intact. Devastating would be an apt term to describe it, and even they couldn't help but shudder when they imagine it. The Mountain of Records was one of the more important heritages of the Master Teacher Academy. If Principal Zhong were to collapse it as well, how could they possibly face their predecessors? After a long moment of silence, the head of the painter school, Song Danqing, said, "When he caused all that ruckus back then, he was only a student. Since he has become the principal, I guess he should know to hold back a little, right? Let's hope that's the case." The others stared at the mountain of records with deep frowns on their faces, seemingly doubtful that Zhongxian would know to hold himself back. The levels of the mountain of records were hidden amid the mountain, making it impossible to tell the results from the outside. Only through entering the trial personally or waiting for the challenger to exit would one know the results. As the school heads thought that the new principal wouldn't take too long to clear the trial, they chose to wait patiently outside. However, the wait went on for far longer than they had thought. An hour, 2 hours, 4 hours, a day. But there still wasn't any movement outside, and no one had left the mountain of records either. Reaching the limits of her patience, Wei Ranxue asked with a deep frown, "School head Mo, are you certain that our principal has entered?" "There is no doubt about that." School head Mo replied affirmatively with a nod. He was the one who had escorted Principal Zhong there personally, and he had seen the latter enter the trial with his own eyes. There couldn't be any mistake about it. Then, why isn't he out yet? Given Principal Zhong's strength, it shouldn't be possible for him to have been trapped for one whole day. Indeed, could it be that some kind of accident has happened? Considering the outstanding talent that Zhongxian had displayed in the various supporting occupations, challenging a mere mountain of records should be like an easy and relaxing walk for him. How could he possibly still be inside even after the passing of an entire day? "I'm afraid that something might have really happened." Zhao Bingshu's face darkened. It shouldn't take a day for any challenger to clear or fail the mountain of records. Be it pass or fail, the challenger should have been out long before then. Even Hu Yarou and the others didn't spend such a long time in there back then. Something was amiss. Hearing school head Zhao's words, Wei Ranxue asked in a panic, "What should we do then?" It hadn't been long since Zhongxian's inauguration, and there was even a huge commotion due to it. If something were to happen to him due to challenging the mountain of records, just the thought of the resulting after effects was more than enough to leave them in a frenzy. "What else can we do? Let's enter to take a look. If something has really happened to Principal Zhong, we will have to act immediately to save him. In any case, we also need to get to the bottom of what is going on," School head Mo said. "I concur. I concur as well." The school heads hurriedly nodded in agreement. Even ordinary students would only take 6 hours at most in the mountain of records. For someone as talented as their principal to take up more than an hour in the mountain of records, it would be a blatant lie if they said that they didn't harbor some doubts regarding the matter. It was simply too inconceivable. They could believe it if the other party had rushed to the 8th or 9th level within an hour. In fact, even if the mountain of records had collapsed into pile of rubble within 10 minutes, it still wouldn't have been beyond their imagination. But for the other party to have remained inside for a whole day, that was unbelievable to them. "All right, let's enter then." Having made a decision, the school heads quickly pushed open the entrance of the mountain of records and entered with their elder tokens in hand. Soon, they arrived at the first room. As soon as they stepped in, they saw the puppet that had charged at Zhongxian earlier lying on the floor with its eyes widened in disbelief, as if a day wasn't sufficient to convince it that what had happened to it was real. Seeing its state, Zhao Bingshu couldn't help but ask, "What happened?" "I lost," the puppet muttered with its spiritless eyes. It seemed that it had suffered too huge a blow and its spirit could dissipate at any moment. Where there is competition, there will be victory and loss. You are the guardian of the first floor, so it's perfectly normal for you to lose to the challenger. Seeing its state, the crowd glanced at one another for a moment before shaking their heads. Given that you are just the guardian of the first level, the least that anyone challenging the trial should do is defeat you. Surely you don't have to be so disappointed over a loss. After consoling the puppet, school head Mo suddenly noticed something that left a deep frown on his face. Perplexed, he asked, "It doesn't seem like there is any external injury on you. How were you defeated?" Hearing those words, a look of indignation immediately surfaced on the puppet's face as it cried tearfully, "He looked at me." Chapter 906. It wasn't just a look looked at you. The crowd frowned in bewilderment. What does that mean? When we asked you how you lost, what we wanted to know was which move or ability of the opponent did you lose to. It is one thing for you to refuse to reply to our question, but why are you suddenly so poetic for? Furthermore, he looked at you. Are you going to follow up with how he will never be able to forget your bewitching looks? We are asking you a serious question here. As a puppet, you should be answering our question properly instead of playing with lyrics. School head Mo and the others shook their heads. Seeing everyone's expression, the puppet nearly burst into tears. What I am saying is that he took a look at me, and I lost. He took a look at you, and you lost. Everyone was stunned. They had heard about how others could defeat their opponent in a single blow with an exquisite move, a powerful palm strike, or a profound sword art. But never had they heard of anyone defeating an opponent with just a look. Confused, Shu Changqing asked, "What you mean is that the challenger who came yesterday didn't even lay his hand on you? With just a gaze from him, you were already forced to admit defeat." That's right. Upon seeing that someone understood what it was saying, the puppet was so touched that it nearly cried tears of joy. That's right. School head Zhao, school head Mo, and the others glanced at one another in bewilderment. As a puppet, you are supposed to stand guard and test the challengers of the Mountain of Records. Yet, to admit defeat with just a look from the new principal? Even if you wish to fawn over him, surely you need not do it so obviously. If that is going to be the case, how can anyone trust in the credibility of this trial in the future? On the other hand, Shu Changqing seemed to have a different view of the matter, and he asked, "Can you recount the battle for me clearly?" Yes. The puppet hurriedly nodded and went through its encounter with Zhongxian the previous day without any hesitation. Back then, as soon as Zhongxian entered, it immediately began its attack. However, just as its fist was about to reach the other party, the young man chuckled softly, and a brilliant glint flashed through his eyes. In that instant, deep fear abruptly assaulted it, and its instincts sent it swiftly retreating in fear. However, due to the sudden change in momentum, its body was put under immense pressure, and before the other party could even make a move, it had already sustained significant damage. While the other school heads were still bewildered by the puppet's words, the head of the Celestial Designer School suddenly began trembling in agitation as his face paled in disbelief. Could it be the flaws in the internal structure of the puppet? Even though the puppets seemed to bear some resemblance to humans in terms of physical appearance, they were ultimately products created by celestial designers, and their internal structure was vastly different as well. If his guess wasn't wrong, it was likely that Principal Zhong had managed to see through the greatest flaw in the internal structure of the puppet. As long as he were to strike that location precisely, he could immediately cripple the puppet, rendering it powerless. Perhaps, even reparations might be impossible. In other words, at that moment that the puppet attacked, not only did Principal Zhong manage to find the flaw in the other party's attack, he had even managed to identify the core weakness behind the puppet's internal structure. That look that he shot the puppet served as a warning to the latter that, if it didn't back down, utter destruction was the outcome that it would face. The puppet might not have understood the true intent behind that gaze, but its instincts had subconsciously told it that it would face grave danger if it continued charging forward, thus triggering an instantaneous reaction within it to retreat. However, such a reaction caused its momentum forward to be abruptly halted, resulting in an immense force crushing down on its body, severely damaging it before the young man before it had even made a move. As simple as this sounded, it was easier said than done. The puppets in the Mountain of Records were specially crafted by the predecessors, and infused into them were the fighting experience of many veteran master teachers. An average master teacher would stand no chance against them at all. Furthermore, just as each leaf on a tree was unique, the same puppets created by the same celestial designer using the same materials might also have their weaknesses appearing in vastly different places. Despite so, to be able to see through its flaws with just a single glance. Just what kind of eye of discernment and battle sense did he possess? This works, too. I heard of talented master teachers clearing the puppet in the first level with a single blow, but never have I heard of anyone defeating it with just a look. Upon understanding what was going on, the school heads clutched their hair in a frenzy. As the 10 great master teachers of the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy, they possessed a far wider outlook than most master teachers. In the past 500 years of their life, they had seen many seemingly inconceivable feats in their life. They had seen how a weaker cultivator incapacitated a stronger cultivator with a single move, or how a powerful individual devastated an entire army with a single crushing move. But never had they heard of anyone severely injuring their enemy with just a look. Yet, the facts were lying right before them. They had long known that their principal would surely accomplish something astounding when they heard that he had challenged the Mountain of Records, but they had thought that the most he could do was clear the trial faster than the talented principal Mo Liujian. But from the looks of it now, they had been limited by their imagination. The other party had managed to clear the level without making a single move, subduing his opponent with just a single look. In the entire master-teacher continent, was there anyone who could top that feat? Let's head to the second level. Suppressing the shock in their minds and casting aside the many doubts they harbored, Zhao Bingshu and the others rushed to the next level. Similar to the sight they had seen on the first floor, the guardian of the second level sat on the floor with a blank look in his eyes, reminiscent of a defeated rooster. He took 2 looks at me, and I was already severely injured. The puppet explained. The lips of the crowd twitched, and they hurried to the third level. He took 3 looks at me. The guardian of the third level cried tearfully. A chrysalis realm primary stage cultivator fighting against a half-saint puppet, that is the difference of an entire realm in terms of cultivation, and all it took was just 3 looks? Everyone's body trembled in disbelief. They had all guessed that Zhongshi's strength would be extraordinary, and they knew that it would be a walk in the park for him to clear the test. But never had they thought that he would be able to clear even the third level with just a few looks, utterly crushing the confidence of all of the puppets he had defeated. Didn't he clear the levels a bit too easily? Back then, when they challenged the Mountain of Records, they were pummeled to the point that they felt as if they already had a foot into the grave. Yet, Principal Zhong was able to destroy the confidence of those powerful puppets with just a look, or 2, or 3. Was there really a need for the world to be so unfair? Sensing the gloomy atmosphere drifting among them, School Head Mo spoke up in consolation. The guardian of the 4th level will be a half-saint advanced stage puppet. Anything that is involved with the word saint, be it half-saint or nascent saint, will be anything but ordinary. From this point onward, it is unlikely that Principal Zhong will be able to get past the puppets with just a few looks. And in truth, the crowd also shared the same thoughts as well, but none of them dared to speak up. As the most powerful elders in the Master Teacher Academy, their eye of discernment, strength, and worldly view could be considered to be at the very peak of the Tier 1 empires. Yet, for some reason, not once had their predictions on Principal Zhong ever been accurate. It was truly inexplicable. Let's head up to take a look. Shaking their heads, the school heads knew that it was pointless for them to overthink this matter. Thus, they began making their way toward the 4th level of the Mountain of Records. The room on the 4th level was significantly larger than the one on the 3rd level. In the corner, a large puppet was lying unmoving on the ground. Its head was bent at an unnatural angle, and its eyes were glazed over, seemingly despairing over life. Xu Changqing stepped forward and asked with a quivering voice, "It can't be that you were left in such a state after Principal Zhong took 4 looks at you. Considering how this fellow was in the same state as those that came before it, could it be that he had been defeated in the same manner? 4 looks." Struggling to its feet, the puppet shook its head. Lowering its head in embarrassment, seemingly desiring to bury himself in the ground, it muttered softly, "He didn't look at me that much. All he did was to shoot me a glance and say, 'Lie down,' and I was already left in this state." "Shot you a glance and said, 'Lie down'?" The crowd glanced at one another in confusion. In the previous levels, Principal Zhong had eyed the puppets' flaws, leaving them deeply unnerved and frightened, thus causing them to instinctively admit defeat. Even though it was inconceivable, it was still an explanation they could barely accept. But this, just because the other party told you to lie down, you lay down on the ground. Aren't you being too obedient? Wait a minute. While the others were confused, a thought struck Jiang Qingqin's mind, and his eyes narrowed. Could Principal Zhong's words have been infused with demonic tune? To make a half-saint advanced stage puppet lie on the ground with mere words, he could think of no other means capable of this feat other than demonic tunes. It was indeed a demonic tune, And he focused his power on my vitals as well. I wasn't even able to retaliate at all. The puppet cried in lamentation. The young man it faced wasn't strong at all, on the contrary, the other party to be rather weak as compared to it, but for some reason, under the other party's gaze and command, its body seemed to move on its own and lay down on the floor obediently. Just the thought of it left him deeply submerged in despair. Focused his power on your vitals. I thought the strength of a demonic tunist lay in attacking souls. Given that you are puppet devoid of a soul, how did he manage to attack you? Shu Changqing frowned in incomprehension. The other school heads carried the same doubts in their minds as well. The reason demonic tunists were widely feared was due to their ability to bypass physical defenses to attack their enemy's soul directly. While spirit did share some similar properties with souls, they were ultimately two different things fundamentally. Considering how the puppet didn't possess a soul, even a 7-star demonic tunist like Jiang Qingqin wouldn't have been able to harm it with his zither tunes. Since that was the case, how did Principal Zhong manage to make the other party lie down obediently with just his words? His demonic tune wasn't aimed at my soul but my physical body. His voice produced a resonance within my body that threatened to reduce it to dust should I continue to attack him. The puppet said with deference and horror reflected in its eyes. Resonance. The school heads widened their eyes in astonishment. There was indeed such a method of offense known among demonic tunists, and it was extremely effective against puppets too. However, it wasn't easy to do so. For one must have a deep understanding of the properties of every single material used in the forging of the puppet, as well as the resulting product after tempering and putting them together so as to determine the resonant frequencies. Otherwise, no matter how loud one's demonic tune was, it would be nothing but futile. To be able to determine the materials used in the creation of the puppet, deduce its resonance frequencies, and determine the type of demonic tune to use against it with just a glance. Was this really happening? Principal Zhong, are you sure you are here to challenge the mountain of records and not to play around and subdue a few puppets while you are at it? After confirming the happenings in this room, Zhao Bingshu sighed deeply and said, the puppet of the next level is at half-saint pinnacle, and it specializes in battle techniques. Given the same cultivation realm, even I would have difficulties defeating it. Perhaps, things will get difficult for Principal Zhong from now on. Let's take a look then. Knowing that it was futile to be making guesses over there, the crowd moved on, heading to the 5th level. Just like in the 4th level, a puppet was lying unmoving on the ground, and unlike the one from before, this one was convulsing every now and then. Rushing forward, school head Feng of the Celestial Designer School took some time to look at it and repair it before asking anxiously, what happened? That man, he told me to lie down twice. The first time, I stood my ground and resisted it. However, on the second command, I was left in such a state, the puppet said gloomily. He issued 2 commands. It seems like this level was indeed not as easy as the previous one for Principal Zhong. It took him 2 whole commands before he was able to subdue the puppet. The next stage is a puppet that possesses the strength of a nascent saint cultivator. Considering that Principal Zhong is only at Chrysalis Realm primary stage, surely he wouldn't be able to subdue his opponent with just 3 commands, right? Why not? You have seen the previous few levels, too. Don't tell me that you are still harboring doubts regarding our principal. This. After hearing the words of the puppets, the lips of the school heads twitched uncontrollably, and they hurriedly rushed for the 6th level. Chapter 907. Entering the 7th level. The 6th level was even larger than the previous, and there were several formations inscribed on the walls all around. A battle between 2 nascent saint cultivators could easily result in devastating damage. Just the aftershock of their strikes was sufficient to induce a disaster. As such, it was imperative for the room to be reinforced with formations so that both parties could let loose and not be restricted by their surroundings. Walking in, they thought that they would see a puppet lying on the ground, just like in the previous 5 levels, but contrary to their expectations, such a sight didn't appear before them. A puppet was seated imposingly not too far away with a disposition reminiscent of a sharp sword, emanating a bone-chilling aura that left shivers running down one's spine. Isn't the guardian of the 6th floor a nascent saint primary stage puppet? Why does it seem like that isn't the case? You are right. It seems like the puppet has grown stronger, but isn't the strength of a puppet fixed, considering how it is unable to cultivate? How could it possibly grow stronger? Upon seeing the puppet, everyone's eyelids began twitching uncontrollably. With their eye of discernment, they could easily tell that the strength of the puppet had already surpassed its nascent saint primary stage bottleneck and reached nascent saint intermediate stage. But, how could this possibly have happened? Puppets were the product of celestial designers, made out of mechanisms. Even if they possessed spirit, they were ultimately still non-living things, making it impossible for them to cultivate under normal circumstances. Since they were unable to cultivate, how could they grow stronger? Could this fellow have killed Principal Zhong? At that very moment, someone amid the crowd suddenly spoke up, and everyone's body stiffened. Their principal had managed to clear the previous few levels easily, subduing the puppets with just mere gestures or words. Given that the puppet of this level had an abrupt power boost, and putting that together with the bizarre disappearance of their principal, could their principal have accidentally let his guard down on this level and been killed by the puppet? If that was really the case, they would be the greatest sinners of the Master Teacher Academy for allowing such a mishap to happen. Unable to hold himself back anymore, Zhao Bingshu whipped out his elder token, rushed forward, and interrogated the puppet. "Where is the challenger who came here a day ago?" The puppet hurriedly got to its feet and asked with a smile, "The challenger who came here a day ago? Ah, you must be talking about Zhong Larosha. May I know why you are looking for my teacher?" "Zhong Larosha? You acknowledged Principal Zhong as your teacher?" School head Zhao, school head Mo, and the others nearly keeled over when they heard those words. "To make the entire apothecary school your student? Fine, we will accept that. Making Senior Byzantium Alios and Senior Golden Origin Cauldron acknowledge you as their master? Alright, we will tolerate that too. Taming the entire Cloud Mist Ridge, since it isn't entirely impossible in the first place, we will acknowledge that as well. But to make a puppet acknowledge you as its teacher, what the heck is that?" Even though a puppet possessed spirit and was capable of communication, it was ultimately still an artifact, a tool. The memories and knowledge it possessed were all infused into it. To acknowledge another as its teacher, what for? Noticing everyone's doubts, the puppet hurriedly explained, "Indeed. In truth, I initially intended to engage my teacher in a battle to stop him from advancing any further, but he noticed a clear flaw in my forging process and helped me correct it. It was just a simple fix, but my strength increased by a whole stage. A person of such capability, it is only right for me to take him as my teacher." "A mistake in your forging process?" The lips of school head Feng of the Celestial Designer School twitched uncontrollably. When did Principal Zhong become a skilled celestial designer as well? For many generations, many talented master teachers had challenged the Mountain of Records, but not a single one had noticed a flaw in them. Yet, Principal Zhong had noticed one as soon as he arrived and even corrected it on the spot. Just by this feat in itself, it could be seen that the other party's mastery as a celestial designer was far above his. Was there a single occupation that their principal was ignorant of? That's right. It's in awe of his capabilities that I acknowledged him as my teacher. In any case, if you are seeking Zhong Larosha, you should head upwards. He headed to the 7th level a day ago. The puppet nodded. Let's go. After learning that Zhong Xian had cleared the 6th level as well, the crowd began making their way over to the 7th level, which was also the level where Principal Mo Liuzhen had stopped back when he first challenged the trial. The guardian of the 7th level was a puppet that harnessed the strength of a nascent saint advanced stage cultivator. Against such a powerful opponent, the crowd couldn't help but wonder if Zhongshe would be placed in danger. I have read through the journal that Principal Mo Liuzhen left regarding the situation when he first challenged the Mountain of Records. Even for someone as talented as he was forced into a corner and nearly lost his life. It was out of sheer luck that he managed to achieve a breakthrough on the spot and surpass his limits, thus defeating the puppet, Zhao Bingshu said with a grim expression as they headed up. Principal Mo Liuzhen had left behind writings detailing his encounters while journeying up the Mountain of Records, and according to it, luck had played a huge part in him clearing the 7th level with his Chrysalis Realm primary stage cultivation. If he hadn't achieved a breakthrough on the spot then, putting aside making history, he might have been severely wounded or even killed due to it. The stronger the puppets were, the harder it would be for them to hold back in battle. As such, the further one progressed up the mountain of records, the more danger one would be placed in. For Principal Zhong to have not returned after an entire day, especially considering how quickly he had cleared the previous levels, could he have met with some kind of unexpected situation? I am truly in awe of Principal Zhong's strength, but his cultivation is simply still too low. There is a gap of almost 3 cultivation realms between him and a nascent Saint Advanced Stage puppet. I fear that his chance of victory is slim. Indeed. I have met quite a few combat masters over the years, but even so, I have never encountered one who could fight an opponent of almost 3 cultivation realms higher and emerge victorious. Since even combat masters are incapable of achieving such a feat, how could our principal possibly succeed? Understanding how fearsome the puppet on the 7th level would be for a Chrysalis Realm primary stage cultivator, the crowd couldn't help but be worried. Combat masters could be considered a type of master teacher, but their roles and responsibilities differed vastly from one another. Combat masters were, in essence, the soldiers of the Master Teacher Pavilion, and their responsibility was to protect mankind and uphold the authority and dignity of the Master Teacher Pavilion. As such, the primary focus of combat masters lay in their fighting prowess. Supporting occupations, the ability to impart knowledge, grooming students, none of those were used to assess their capabilities. There was only one criterion they had to fulfill, and that was to wield sufficient strength. In terms of knowledge and scope of skills, they might even be beneath that of the other occupations. However, in terms of fighting prowess, they were an unrivaled existence in the Master Teacher Pavilion, considering how even they were incapable of rivaling opponents almost 3 cultivation realms stronger than them. Little had to be said for others. With worries plaguing their hearts, the crowd arrived on the 7th level. Pushing open the door and stepping in, the first thing they saw were the many formations inscribed on the walls to reinforce the room, similar to those on the 6th floor. They hurriedly scanned the room to search for the puppet standing guard, but for some reason, there was not a person to be seen in this vast room. They couldn't help but feel perplexed. No puppet or traces of battle to be seen. What could this possibly mean? Seemingly noticing something, School Head Mo pointed to the corner and asked, "Wait a moment. Look at that. What is that?" The crowd hurriedly turned their sights over, and there, they saw a pile of miscellaneous parts lying on the ground. The puppet has been dismantled. School Head Feng of the Celestial Designer School exclaimed with twitching lips as he examined the miscellaneous parts carefully. The puppets of the Mountain of Records had been carefully constructed out of several dozen thousand parts, making them an extremely intricate artifact. Looking at the innumerable parts that had clearly come from a puppet before them, it was obvious that someone had dismantled the puppet in this stage and reduced it to its primitive form. After a moment of astonishment, School Head Mo asked anxiously, "Can we confirm that these are the parts of the puppet on this level?" If Principal Zhong had really managed to dismantle the puppet of this level to such a state, he really couldn't begin to imagine how powerful the other party must be. "I can't be entirely sure, but there is a very high chance that is the case," School Head Feng replied with a bitter smile. He had never seen the puppet on this level, but based on the miscellaneous parts left on the ground, he could tell that the puppet had a particularly advanced design and forging method that could create a nascent Saint Advanced Stage puppet when put together. For such a powerful puppet to be left in such a state, that was definitely the doing of their principal. There was no doubt about it. They had been thinking that it would be difficult for the other party to achieve victory on this level, but to think that the other party would end up tearing the puppet all the way down into its parts like that. "Principal Zhong, you sure are vicious. The puppet is only the guardian responsible for guarding the level. Just how did it offend you for you to dismantle it so callously? Several dozen thousand miscellaneous parts, even with a blueprint in hand, it would still take a group of 6-star celestial designer several days in order to put it back together. More importantly, that would only be the body. To return its spirit and battle sense would be a much more troublesome process, and they would probably require the help of the martial arts school for that. In other words, Zhongxian's act of dismantling this puppet would leave those 2 schools busy for half a month in order to allow this level to function once more. However, Considering that it would probably be a few thousand years before another challenger would be able to reach this far, there was no need for them to hurry either. It seems like Principal Zhong really went easy on the puppets on the previous few levels, Wei Ranxue remarked. In the previous few levels, their principal had only shot the puppets a look or issued them a command in order to force them to submit. He hadn't used any real force against them at all. Perhaps it was due to the heightened difficulty of this level that had forced him to make a move. Nevertheless, even if they were to suppress their cultivation to nascent saint advanced stage, similar to that of the puppet, it would still be difficult for them to achieve victory. Yet, their principal had managed to tear the other party down into its most basic parts despite his chrysalis realm primary stage cultivation. The thought of it sent endless sighs leaving their mouths. Even Principal Mo Liuzhen only achieved a narrow victory back then, and yet, not only did Principal Zhong achieve a victory, he even managed to dismantle the puppet down to its parts. I really do want to know how he cultivates to grow so strong. With twitching lips, the crowd fell silent. It seemed like the strength of their principal was as monstrous as his mastery in his supporting occupations as well. To be able to defeat cultivators of 3 cultivation realms above him, that was already beyond the average standard of a combat master. Fearsome. Previously, they had thought that their principal had put all of his effort into his supporting occupations in order to achieve such astounding proficiency in them, but from the looks of it now, it seemed like they had misunderstood him. From the start to the end, his focus had been on his cultivation, and his supporting occupations were just something he had learned leisurely. Otherwise, how could he possibly wield such astounding fighting prowess? There is no strength that comes without hardship. Extraordinary strength can only come with extraordinary diligence and hardship. Putting everything aside, just the willpower he must have needed to reach this far was sufficient to leave them deep in admiration. Scanning the room and finding Zhong Xian nowhere in sight, Zhao Bingshu suddenly recalled something and frowned. Since Principal Zhong has cleared this level, he must have gone on to the 8th. This is bad. Indeed, it seems like he went to the 8th level. At this moment, School Head Mo's face also turned grave. Noticing the unnatural reaction of the duo, Wei Ranxue asked doubtfully, "What's wrong? Is there something wrong with the 8th level?" Her expertise lay in terpsichorean arts, which, similar to demonic tunes, had little effectiveness on puppets. As such, she had never challenged the Mountain of Records, and she possessed little understanding of it as well. "We fear that Principal Zhong will face danger on the 8th level," Zhao Bingshu said worriedly. "You are still worried about that? I think that you can set your mind at ease now. Before the 7th level, we also thought that Principal Zhong would face danger. However, the fact that he was able to dismantle the puppet to this point shows that the strength he wields is far beyond our imagination. With that, it shouldn't be much of an issue for him to clear the 8th level," Wei Ranxue reassured with a soft chuckle. They had been a little jittery ever since entering the Mountain of Records, worrying that some mishap could have happened to Zhong Xian. However, time after time, the latter had shown them through his overwhelming strength that their worry was unfounded. After witnessing 7 levels of miracles from their principal, was there still anything that they needed to worry over? Even if someone were to tell Wei Ranxue that the latter had cleared the entire Mountain of Records, she still wouldn't have been surprised in the least. Seeing that Wei Ranxue was oblivious of the matter, Zhao Bingshu shook his head helplessly. "It's not as easy as you think. The puppet on the 8th level is different from those before." Chapter 908, The Frustrated Puppet Different. What can there be different about the puppets? Wei Ranxue was perplexed. After a moment of hesitation, Zhao Bingshu replied, "To tell you honestly, the Guardian on the 8th level isn't a puppet but a clone that Principal Mo Liuzhen made out of one of his rib bones back then." "A clone?" Wei Ranxue was stunned. Indeed. Back then, when Principal Mo Liuzhen advanced his cultivation to Chrysalis Realm Pinnacle, he challenged the Mountain of Records once more, and unlike the first time, he managed to reach the 8th level this time around. In that battle, he felt that there was a fatal flaw with the puppet, so he took out one of his rib bones, and making use of an earth core crystal he had in his storage ring, he forged a new guardian for this flaw and infused his fighting skills into it. "Earth core crystal? Do you mean that rare or that can only be found near the world's core?" Wei Ranxue frowned. She had heard of the earth core crystal before. It was an extremely rare ore that was known for its toughness due to being tempered by the extreme conditions near the world's core. Harnessing great heat energy within it, it was an ideal material for tempering one's physical body and forging puppets. However, it was said that this incredible ore had been completely depleted several thousand years ago, and it was nigh impossible to find a piece of it in the world. For Principal Mo Liujian to use it to forge a puppet for the Mountain of Records, even though it was for a good cause, they couldn't help but think his actions extravagant. In any case, if the puppet was truly forged out of earth core crystal, by no means should its strength ever be underestimated. Even with the cultivation of nascent Saint Realm pinnacle, such a puppet would be able to emerge victorious in a battle against a Saint Realm 1-done expert. Not only so, Principal Mo Liujian has also left a sliver of his will within it. In other words, the puppet of the 8th level is no longer an ordinary puppet but an existence with a battle sense nearly on par with Principal Mo Liujian back then. Pairing that with a cultivation of nascent Saint Realm pinnacle cultivation, nigh invincible defense, and a body that knows no pain, it is unlikely that even the Chrysalis Realm pinnacle Principal Mo Liujian would stand a chance against it. Needless to say, the Chrysalis Realm primary stage Principal Zhong, Zhao Bingshu said with a bitter smile. It wasn't that he didn't have any trust in Principal Zhong, but the enemy he faced was simply too strong. Furthermore, when Principal Mo Liujian left behind the puppet, he was already at Chrysalis Realm pinnacle, not too far away from reaching half-saint. Between fellow top-notch geniuses, nearly a realm of difference in strength was a practically unbreachable gap. On top of that, the opponent was a monster that knew no pain nor fatigue. It was no wonder School Head Zhao and School Head Mo had no confidence whatsoever. Wei Ranxue was at a loss for words. If that was truly the case, it would be truly too difficult for Principal Zhong to emerge victorious. It could almost be said that victory was a pipe dream. There's no point discussing it here. Let's head up, and we will know the answer soon enough. Xu Changqing waved his hand to stop the discussion before gesturing toward the stairs upwards. UN. The others nodded in agreement before heading toward the 8th level. The 8th level was extremely quiet, but the many depressions of different areas and depths on the wall and ground made it clear that an intense battle had occurred there. Zhao Bingshu took a quick look at the surroundings and said, "We were late. The battle has already ended." As master teachers, they could easily tell that the battle had already ended a day ago, so they quickly rushed into the room and looked around. However, they couldn't see anyone or any miscellaneous parts anywhere. Eventually, they could only stare at one another and ask doubtfully, "So, who won?" If it was just like in the previous level, various miscellaneous parts scattered about the area, there would be no doubt that their principal had won. But the ground was clean except for the marks of battle here and there. Could their principal have really lost? But if he had lost, where was the puppet guarding this level then? Why would it have disappeared too? Suddenly, Wei Ranxue exclaimed anxiously, "There is some blood here." Alarmed, the crowd hurriedly gathered together and saw a pool of blood on the ground. Judging from the amount of bloodshed, the wounded must have suffered rather severe injuries. Principal Zhong. The crowd clenched their fists together tightly. While the puppet was a clone made out of Principal Mo Liujian's rib bone, blood didn't run through its body. In other words, the blood could only have come from Principal Zhong. For their powerful principal to have stumbled here, indeed, defeating the Principal Mo Liujian's clone to clear this level was no easy feat. Noticing everyone's apprehension, Zhao Bingshu reassured them. Even though Principal Zhong is injured, there should be no need to worry. Since the puppet of this level harnesses Principal Mo Liujian's will, it shouldn't have executed a killing blow against Principal Zhong. The puppets of the previous 7 levels possessed ordinary spirits, capable of only fighting as they were commanded. They didn't have the emotions or sentience of a human. On the other hand, the puppet on the 8th level had a sliver of Principal Mo Liujian's will imbued into it, so naturally, it possessed his consciousness as well. After learning of Principal Zhong's identity, it shouldn't have gone too heavily on him. At the very least, Principal Zhong's life wouldn't have been in danger. Just as everyone was deducing what had happened, the head of the painter school suddenly exclaimed, "Everyone, take a look over there." Everyone quickly turned to him, only to see his finger pointed toward the ceiling with a dumbfounded look on his face. Turning their gazes upwards, the crowd was also taken aback by what they saw. There was a huge depression on the ceiling with a human silhouette embedded deeply into it. The human silhouette had its eyes tightly closed, probably still unconscious from the impact of the blow it had suffered. "That is the puppet Principal Mo Liuzhen forged," Zhao Bingshu exclaimed in astonishment. Upon recognizing the figure, the school heads quickly rushed up to pull the puppet out from the ceiling. School head Zhong and school head Feng hurriedly examined its condition and treated it. A moment later, it finally opened its eyes. As soon as it opened its eyes, its face immediately flushed in anger as it cursed furiously. "Damn it! Just who in the world is that shameless fellow who came by just now?" "Shameless fellow?" Hearing Principal Mo Liuzhen's evaluation of Principal Zhong, the mouths of the crowd began twitching uncontrollably. According to historical records, Principal Mo Liuzhen was not only known for his talents but his composed temperament as well. This was also the main reason he was able to leave his mark in history as the #1 figure of the Master Teacher Academy in its 10,000 years of history, respected by many generations of students and teachers. Yet, such an incredible figure actually began cursing without the slightest bit of concern for his bearing. "In the duel, that fellow wasn't a match for me at all," the puppet that Principal Mo Liuzhen had left behind explained indignantly. "After a few blows, I could already tell that he was bound to lose in the end, so I told him to leave and return only after he had cultivated to Chrysalis Realm Pinnacle. But who knew that the fellow would suddenly proclaim his admiration for me passionately, requesting desperately for me to impart my battle techniques to him. Not only so, he even grabbed my hands and began spewing praise after praise for me." At this point, a regretful look emerged on the puppet's face for falling for the other party's ploy. After all he had said, it wouldn't have been right for me to turn him down as a master teacher, so I began to offer him some pointers for his breakthrough. But who knew that fellow would adamantly clutch onto my hands, claiming that he wanted to come into close contact with his idol. I thought that his actions were out of earnest admiration for me, but who could have known? The more the puppet spoke, the more furious it became. Eventually, its face reddened to the point that it seemed like a volcano on the verge of eruption. Seeing the other party stop at the crucial moment, Wei Ranxue urged it on. "Who could have known? Who could have known that it was all a trap by the shameless fellow? From the start to the end, his goal was to use the earth core crystal within my body to cultivate. You all should be able to tell that my body is forged out of earth core crystal. If that fellow had absorbed the energy of my earth core crystal rapidly, I would have surely noticed something. But he secretly stole it bit by bit while distracting me with his sweet words, so by the time I noticed, he had already stolen most of the energy contained within the earth core crystal. Even if a puppet was infused with the will of a human, its senses still wouldn't be as sensitive as a human body. Taking the soulless metal humanoid for example, it was a body constructed mainly for movement and battle. Other than that, its senses and other functions were secondary to humans. Even without the earth core crystal, I will only suffer a drop in my defense. But for some reason, that fellow's physical strength suddenly soared as well. With these two factors coming into play simultaneously, I was sent flying into the ceiling with a single punch and was knocked out from the impact. The puppet recounted the happenings furiously. If it had known that that fellow intended to secretly cultivate using its earth core heart, it would have never listened to his word. The state it was in. Putting aside how it had suffered from a significant dip in its defense and fighting prowess, it had even been utterly crushed in a battle against someone it had defeated easily a moment earlier. In Principal Mo Liuzhen's many years of cultivation, he had seen many master teachers, but never had he seen one as shameless as that fellow. Rage, frustration, and indignation bubbled furiously within him, which had led to his outburst upon seeing the school heads. After learning what had happened, the crowd glanced at one another with twitching faces. In a desperate life-and-death battle, such actions would be nothing much. But to resort to such in a trial, especially when the opponent had already stopped fighting, that was indeed a little improper. After venting his frustrations, the puppet sighed deeply and waved its hands to show that it was over the matter. Forget it, this is how battles are supposed to be. There is no room for compassion or fairness in it. On the bright side, this shows that he isn't a rigid person restricted by conventions and the sort. A person like him will be able to reach greater heights than others. As the role models for others, master teachers were expected to uphold their bearings. Nevertheless, they mustn't be too inflexible, or else how could they innovate and reach greater heights? Putting everything aside, even Kong Shi had been an extremely adaptable person. Back then, he had sneaked into the subterranean gallery thrice and mixed in together with the otherworldly demonic tribe, disguised as one of their own. Eventually, he had even managed to rise through the ranks, being conferred as a king, followed by an emperor, and so on. Through such efforts, he had nearly managed to wipe out their entire tribe. If master teachers had insistently embraced conventions, choosing to follow only the teachings of the predecessors instead of bravely forging their own path, humanity also wouldn't have come such a long way over just several dozen millenniums. Hearing Principal Mo's words, Zhao Bingshu and the others heaved a sigh of relief. It's good that Elder is able to think of it like that. On one hand was the will of the esteemed preceding principal, Mo Liuzhen, and on the other was their current principal. As the saying goes, the ones to suffer in a battle between deities are the mortals. It wouldn't have been right for them to side with anyone in a conflict between the two, so it was best if Principal Mo could let this matter go himself. Shooting a glance at the stairway above, the puppet stood up, turned to Zhao Bingshu, and said, "Since that fellow was able to defeat me, he must have proceeded on to the 9th level. The 9th level is a forbidden ground, so even with your elder tokens, you won't be able to enter it. Since that's the case, you should wait for him here instead." A restriction was placed on the 9th level such that only those who had defeated the guardian of the 8th level with their own strength were allowed to enter it. As Mo Liuzhen himself had only managed to clear the 8th level by exploiting a fatal flaw in the puppet, he hadn't been allowed to advance any further back then either. UN. Zhao Bingshu and the others nodded. They were aware of the rules as well, and knowing the difficulty of the 8th level, they had thought that they would find Principal Zhong here. However, the latter had surpassed their expectations and advanced even further. Suddenly, school head Feng of the Celestial Designer School noticed something and exclaimed in astonishment. "Wait, something is wrong. Elder, it doesn't seem like your cultivation is at nascent Saint Pinnacle." Chapter 909, The 9th floor. My cultivation isn't at nascent Saint Pinnacle. The puppet was stunned for an instant before lowering its head to take a look at itself as it exerted its strength. Hong Long. A powerful aura immediately burst into the air, forcing everyone back several steps. This is Saint Realm 1 Dan? How did I achieve a breakthrough? The puppet was completely stunned. It had been a puppet for more than 4,000 years, and all along, its cultivation had been capped at nascent Saint Realm Pinnacle. Not once had it ever thought that it could still further its cultivation. If I'm not mistaken, this must be the doing of Principal Zhong. In exchange for devouring the energy contained in your Earth Core crystal, he helped you advance your cultivation, Zhao Bingshu said. After the experience on the 6th level, they knew that their principal possessed the capability to do so. Most likely, he must have felt embarrassed about devouring the energy harnessed within the Earth Core crystal in the other party's body, so he helped to alter the other party's constitution slightly to allow its energy to flow smoother, thus enhancing its cultivation significantly. Hearing school head Zhao's explanation, the puppet was stunned. Even though the Earth Core heart was important to it, it wasn't the centerpiece of its existence. Giving it up in order to raise its cultivation to Saint Realm, it could be said that it was the winner of this deal. Just that, with its cultivation raised, it would be nigh impossible for the later generations to clear the trial. It was almost a certainty that they would be impeded on the 8th level, making it impossible for anyone to reach the 9th level. It was an act of goodwill toward the puppet, but the challengers that came after him would probably be cursing him furiously as they fought the enhanced puppet. Defeating a nascent Saint Pinnacle puppet was already nearly impossible. What Zhongxian had effectively done was create a deadlock on the 8th level, preventing anyone from advancing any further in the future. At that moment, Wei Ranxue suddenly turned to the puppet and asked, "What is on the 9th level?" "The 9th level? I have no idea either. I only know that no one has been there since the establishment of the Master Teacher Academy. Probably, the only one who knows is the founder of the academy, Founder Mu Kai." The puppet shook his head in response. The one guarding the 8th level was a nascent Saint Realm Pinnacle puppet, whereas the prerequisite for challenging the Mountain of Records was for one's cultivation to be beneath half-saint. In other words, one would have to challenge an opponent nearly 3 realms stronger than oneself in order to reach the 9th level. Even the incredibly talented Chrysalis Realm Pinnacle Principal Mo Liujian Bak then had been unable to accomplish this feat, needless to say the others. In the 10,000 years since the founding of the Master Teacher Academy, that fellow was the only one to have achieved this feat. Noticing everyone's worries, the puppet said, no matter what, that fellow shouldn't be in any danger. The main purpose for the establishment of the Mountain of Records is to sieve out the talents of the Master Teacher Academy, so there is no way it will allow one who possesses the ability to reach the 9th level to die in there. The others nodded. Indeed. A person who had cleared the previous 8 stages could already be considered a top-notch genius even among the entire Master Teacher Pavilion, so how could a mishap of any sort be allowed to befall a talent like that in the final level? As such, there was no need to worry about that matter, but even putting aside their worries, they were still curious to know what their principal would encounter in the 9th level. In that moment, they couldn't help but peer into the darkness of the stairway that led to the mysterious 9th level. Rewinding time back to a day ago. After clearing the 8th level, Zhongxian took a look at the puppet, which he had pinned onto the ceiling, and heaved a sigh of relief before heading forward. Honestly speaking, it seemed like he had overestimated his strength. In truth, he had already been struggling against the nascent Saint puppet on the 6th level. His strength exceeded 65 million ding, granting him a might comparable to nascent Saint intermediate stage cultivator, but the difference between a transcendent mortal and saint didn't just lie in their strength. Those who had achieved sainthood had already reached an entirely different level of existence, granting them superior reaction speed and reflexes as compared to others. Even with his greater strength, it would still be difficult for him to achieve victory. In other words, despite his strength, half-saint pinnacle was the limit of his own ability. If he wished to defeat a nascent saint primary stage cultivator, he would have to depend on the library of Heaven's Path. As such, he offered guidance to the puppet of the 6th level in order to convince it to acknowledge him as its teacher, thus successfully clearing the level. However, the puppet on the 7th level didn't trust him, so the same ploy didn't work against it. Unable to overpower the other party, he could only dismantle the other party bit by bit while dodging its attacks. If he had been able to defeat the other party in a proper battle, he wouldn't have resorted to such a method. To be forced to dismantle the puppet down to its very parts in order to defeat it, how embarrassing. On the 8th level, he encountered the puppet principal Mo Liujian had forged using his rib bones, and after exchanging a few blows, he was already severely wounded from the other party's pummeling, leaving him spewing large mouthfuls of blood. He had thought that the 8th level would be his limit, but he suddenly noticed that the puppet was made out of earth core crystal. The earth core crystal happened to be the artifact required for cultivating the 4th incandescence of the quintuple incandescence golden body, and he had been searching for it all this while but to no avail. Seeing it here, he nearly went frenzied with delight. However, if he were to ask for it from the other party directly, there was no doubt that he would be rejected flatly. Left with no choice, he could only resort to some tricks up his sleeves. Putting that aside, using the energy from the earth core crystal, he managed to advance his quintuple incandescence golden body to the 4th incandescence, thus inducing a massive surge in his physical strength. From its original 16 million ding, it had doubled to 32 million ding. In other words, just in terms of physical strength, he was already on par with a Chrysalis Realm advanced stage cultivator. Factoring in the 29 million ding from his Zhenqi cultivation and 20 million ding from his soul cultivation, his total might added up to a grand total of 81 million ding. With such strength, he could easily overpower even a nascent Saint Pinnacle cultivator. On top of that, Principal Mo Liujian's puppet wasn't prepared for his assault at all, so it was easily sent into the ceiling from the might of his fist and fainted. Nascent Saint Primary Stage 60 million ding, Intermediate Stage 65 million ding, Advanced Stage 70 million ding, Pinnacle 75 million ding. Even though I defeated the puppet in the previous level, my true fighting prowess is still some distance away from matching a nascent Saint Pinnacle cultivator. While Zhongxian had managed to send the puppet forged by Principal Mo Liujian flying with a single punch, he wasn't so arrogant as to believe that he wielded strength comparable to a nascent Saint Pinnacle cultivator. The reason he was able to succeed was due to his understanding of the flaws in the other party's moves from the previous battle and the other party letting its guard down from its underestimating of him. Otherwise, in a proper battle against a nascent Saint Pinnacle cultivator, even with his superior strength, he wouldn't have been able to achieve a victory that easily. That was also the reason why Zhongxian wanted to maintain a low profile. It could possibly become the key for him to overcoming dire situations like that battle. As the saying goes, a tree that rises above the forest will only be torn down by the wind, an embankment taller than the shore will only be washed away by the waves. But it was a pity that every time he wished to maintain a low profile, everything would just go contrary to his wishes. This had left him deeply distressed. Perhaps that was life. The outstanding were meant to live brilliant and short lives. Considering how Zhongxian didn't even wield the fighting prowess to overcome a nascent Saint Pinnacle cultivator, he knew full well that he stood no chance at clearing the 9th level. Unless he perfected the Chrysalis Realm Heaven's Path divine art and advanced his cultivation to Chrysalis Realm Pinnacle. But there was no way he could find such cultivation technique manuals here. Since I have already reached this point, I might as well head up to take a look. Sighing deeply, Zhongxian eventually decided to advance to the 9th level. Having come to this point, it would be truly regretful if he stopped there without at least giving it a try. At the very most, he would just have to admit defeat once he found himself in a hopeless situation. Pushing open the entrance to the 9th level, an extremely vast room unfolded before his eyes. An elder came into his sight. Upon seeing the elder's appearance, Zhongxian frowned. Musha. It was none other than founder Mu Kai. He had just met the other party's soul during the inauguration ceremony, so there was no way he wouldn't recognize him. No, that isn't it. This is a Saint Realm puppet that Musha forged based on himself. It wasn't very apparent, but Zhongshe was able to swiftly tell what was amiss about the elder before his eyes. Naturally, the elder before him couldn't possibly be founder Mu Kai in person, and considering that it possessed a corporeal body, it wasn't just his soul either. Rather, it was a puppet forged according to his appearance. However, the craftsmanship was so exquisite that Zhongxian had to take several glances before noticing it. Watching as Zhongxian walked over, Musha's puppet said with a smile, "To be able to clear the previous levels with a cultivation of Chrysalis Realm primary stage, you are a truly talented individual." Paying respects to Musha, Zhongxian clasped his fist and bowed. Even though the other party was only a puppet, a sliver of Musha's will was infused into it, so its prowess wasn't one he could afford to underestimate. Yuan Musha's puppet nodded with a slight smile. "I possess a cultivation of Saint Realm Wand and primary stage at the moment. As long as you can defeat me, you will have cleared the mountain of records and earned the rights to claim the reward from me." "Defeat you?" A look of difficulty surfaced on Zhongxian's face. Honestly speaking, his chance of defeating the other party in a proper battle was near zero. However, if he were to utilize his exceptional capability at tearing things apart to reduce the other party back down to its miscellaneous parts, he should still be able to defeat the other party. Just that, considering the opponent was the founder of the Master Teacher Academy, it would be disrespectful for him to use such an unseemly mean against it. If others were to think that the principal of the Master Teacher Academy had destructive tendencies due to this matter, what would become of his reputation? Don't worry. Feel free to use any means at your disposal, there is no need to stand on ceremony. Seemingly noticing the worries Zhongxian harbored, Musha smiled. To be honest, it is already improper for a Saint Realm cultivator like me to duel against a Chrysalis Realm primary stage cultivator like you. Are you certain? Zhongxian asked with a bizarre expression on his face. Is it really fine for me to use any means at my disposal? Of course. Musha replied with a smile. Since that's the case, pardon me. Hearing that there were no restrictions on the means he could utilize, Zhongxian heaved a sigh of relief as the burden weighing down his heart vanished. Who? The golden origin cauldron materialized before Zhongxian. Ding ding, go and pummel that fellow for me, Zhongxian commanded with a majestic wave of his hand. Don't worry, it's just a puppet of old Mu. I will reduce it to cinders this very instant. The golden origin cauldron nodded as it began to rush forward. As the guardian saint artifact that the headquarters had given to the Master Teacher Academy at its founding, it had met Mu Kai back then, so it was able to recognize the latter easily. Upon seeing the sight, Mu Shi's lips twitched as he nearly fainted on the spot. Anxious, he hurriedly yelled, "Wait a moment." Gesturing for the golden origin cauldron to stop, he turned to Mu Shi with a doubtful look. "What's wrong? Didn't you say that I can use any means at my disposal? Why are you stopping me all of a sudden?" The face of Mu Shi's puppet reddened as it said, "Cough cough. When I said that you can use any means at your disposal, I was referring to your abilities as an individual, such as your battle techniques and your supporting occupations, and not your saint-tier artifacts. Otherwise, with the might of your saint-tier artifact, even a transcendent mortal 1-dan or 2-dan cultivator would be able to easily clear the mountain of records, thus rendering the entire trial meaningless." It should have clarified its words further in order to avoid such an awkward situation. The mountain of records was a trial to assess one's individual prowess. If one had such a formidable artifact in one's possession, one would be able to easily clear the entire trial even if one's strength was lacking. If that was the case, what was the use of the trial? I see. Pardon me for my misunderstanding. Zhong Xian scratched his head as he returned the golden origin cauldron to his storage ring. With a flick of his wrist, he took out a spirit pinnacle sword from his storage ring and pointed it at the other party. "Will this do?" Mu Shi's puppet nodded with a smile. Just as it was about to speak, the sharp glint of a sword reminiscent of a shooting star abruptly flashed across its eyes. Chapter 9-10, Zhong Xian's Defeat. "That's some fine swordsmanship you have there." The eyes of Mu Shi's puppet lit up as it nodded in approval while moving to counterattack Zhong Xian's move. In an instant, the human and the puppet were already colliding with one another. Boom 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 boom. Exerting his full might, Zhong Xian's sword fell relentlessly on the puppet like waves in the river, each strike growing faster and stronger than the previous. Even though he hadn't cultivated any particularly powerful sword arts, he had managed to compile the many sword arts he had obtained so far to form the profound Heaven's Path sword art. With its prowess, he could even overwhelm a Saint Realm expert off guard. But as formidable as it is, you are still too weak. With a light chuckle, Mu Shi's puppet tapped its finger forward. Voila! The air right before Zhong Xian's sword suddenly seemed to have collapsed into an abyss, and the sharp glint of his blade seemed to have been pulled into a whirlpool, draining it of its strength. Knowing that he would be placed in a vulnerable situation if he didn't retaliate to that swiftly, Zhong Xian gathered his full strength and forcefully pushed his blade ahead. Hong long! The collapsed air abruptly burst apart like a balloon, and Zhong Xian's sword surged forward with incredible momentum to clash with the puppet's finger. Voila! As if having struck a thick wall, Zhong Xian felt a numbing sensation assault his arm, and a stifled feeling welled up in his chest. In the next instant, he was abruptly sent flying from the recoil of the collision. Without any hesitation, Zhong Xian swiftly utilized the red dust heaven ascending steps to counteract the momentum of his retreat while pushing himself back to the ground, leaving behind numerous deep footprints on the ground in the midst of doing so. After regaining his posture once more, he roared furiously and charged forward. Voila! A sword sliced through the air, heading straight toward where the weakness of Mu Shi's puppet was. Seeing that the other party was able to see through the weaknesses in his movements so quickly, Mu Shi's puppet was taken aback for a moment before chuckling softly. Keen eyes. Following which, he swiftly twisted, and the weakness from a moment ago disappeared without a trace. Even Heaven's Path was imperfect, let alone man-made creations in the world. It was normal for any battle technique to have its own weaknesses. However, while Zhong Xian was able to identify the weaknesses accurately, the difference between his speed and reflexes against his opponents was so great that he was unable to exploit it. In other words, in the interval between him making his attack and his strike landing, his opponent had sufficient time to evade it. As a result, the weaknesses he had identified became nothing more than a joke. As expected of the founder of the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy, Zhong Xian thought grimly. If it had been any Saint Realm primary stage cultivator in the other party's place, it would be doubtful if the other party would be able to come up with an instantaneous counterattack to his moves, especially since his moves were directed at the other party's weaknesses. However, his opponent was actually able to go to the extent of even predicting the next few moves that he could possibly make within this narrow window, sealing away any alternative offensive maneuver he could utilize against the other party. Fearsome. The other party's strength didn't lie solely in his fearsome might, speed, and reflexes, but his astounding eye of discernment as well. Put those together with the other party's vast combat experience and sharp battle sense, and the other party was truly a nearly impossible adversary for him to overcome with his current cultivation. Nevertheless, Zhongxian didn't panic. As long as he makes a move, there will surely be flaws that I can exploit. I don't believe that you can continue dodging until the end of time. Even though Zhongxian usually relied on the Byzantium Alios beast and the Golden Origin Cauldron, rarely making a move himself, he had collected and gone through many books on combat and accumulated the wisdom of many predecessors, sharpening his battle sense to one that was on par with a veteran general, or even beyond. Regardless of how profound or elusive a technique was, it was bound to have its flaws. As long as he could pull off the correct maneuvers to counteract to the other party's move, even if it was a god-tier battle technique that the other party was using, he would still be able to corner them. But of course, that was still easier said than done. Even if he had the Library of Heaven's Path, which allowed him to see through the flaws in the other party's attacks, his strength was still lacking for him to push his attacks through decisively. Break. With the flexibility of a serpent, Zhongxian's sword surged forth, and in the blink of an eye, it was already on the verge of striking one of the Ming men of Mu Shi's puppet. As long as he struck that point, he should be able to inflict serious injuries on the other party even with the power disparity between them. A good move, Mu Shi's puppet remarked. However, as if having guessed that Zhongxian would make such a maneuver, it didn't show the slightest hint of anxiety. Instead, it chuckled softly and jolted its arms. In an instant, Zhongxian felt an overwhelming might crushing down on him, suppressing his aura. His seemingly indomitable sword was abruptly halted in its path under that astounding force. Peng! The overwhelming might struck Zhongxian squarely, and he was sent tumbling back in the air before crashing heavily onto the wall. With a reddened face, fresh blood spurted out of his mouth. For 2 consecutive moves, he had successfully identified the other party's weakness and aimed the attack at the other party's blind spot. But the disparity in strength was simply too great. Even technique was insufficient to bridge the difference. Wiping away the fresh blood on the edges of his lips, Zhongxian shook his head with a bitter smile. I am still too weak. He was only at Chrysalis Realm primary stage, a gap of 3 whole realms from Saint Realm Wundan primary stage. Even his physical body and soul cultivation were insufficient to breach this massive difference. Before the other party, his immense strength exceeding 80 million ding was not worth mentioning at all. Saint Realm experts, having opened their Zhukong acupoint, were not only capable of flight but wielded a might exceeding 100 million ding as well. Even if he could find the other party's flaws with his Library of Heaven's Path, he didn't possess sufficient strength to breach the other party's defense. So, how could he possibly win? Even if one were to equip an ant with a sword, there was no way it could rival an elephant. They were simply existences on 2 different levels. No matter how skilled the ant was, it couldn't possibly win. Such was the situation he was faced with. The other party was a puppet that boasted nigh invincible defense, and with his current strength and weapon, he couldn't breach the other party's defense. On top of that, the other party possessed sharp battle sense that allowed it to retaliate against every opportunity he received. This was truly a despairing situation. How could anyone overcome such a challenge? I guess, I have no choice then. Knowing that he wouldn't stand a chance in a proper fight, Zhongxian immersed his consciousness into the Library of Heaven's Path and summoned a certain book. Since the other party was a puppet, it had to be assembled part after part. If nothing worked out, he would just have to abandon his dignity and dismantle that fellow into its miscellaneous parts as he had done on the 7th level. Flipping open the book slightly, the content of the book immediately surfaced in his mind, becoming part of his knowledge 7-star serial puppet. Upon noting the name of the puppet, Zhongxian's eyebrows immediately shot up. The puppet on the 7th level was also a serial puppet as well, but it was only at 6-star, so he was able to dismantle it with relative ease. A 7-star serial puppet, it was truly hard to say whether or not he would be able to dismantle it with his current strength. On top of that, the other party wouldn't simply stand idly on the spot while it was being dismantled. Once the other party sensed that it was in danger, it would surely retaliate with all of its might, and under such circumstances, he had no confidence that he would emerge as the victor. Forget it, I will still have to give it a try. Taking all of the flaws of Moosh's puppet into mind, Zhongxian took in a deep breath and turned his gaze to the other party once more. Who? Executing the Heaven's Path movement art, Zhongxian's figure vanished on the spot. In the next instant, he appeared behind Moosh's puppet with his sword cutting diagonally down on it. Simultaneously, the fingers of his left hand stabbed for a certain point on the other party's back. Interesting. Noticing Zhongxian's attacks on its vitals, Moosh's puppet abruptly turned around and sent a punch at him. The punch was not a battle technique or a maneuver, just a simple attack packed with raw strength. However, Zhongxian instinctively sensed that he would be severely damaged if he were to push on. Thus, executing Heaven's Path movement art once, he swiftly sidestepped to the left and dodged the attack. Naturally, his offense also fell flat with this defensive maneuver he made. What incredible reflexes! Zhongxian face darkened. Never had he felt so indignant in a battle before. Despite grasping the weaknesses of the other party tightly in his hands, he was still forced back with just pure strength. As long as he didn't possess that darned strength, putting aside whether he would be able to defeat the other party, it would already be a blessing if he could survive the other party's attack. Just as he had found the other party's weakness, the other party had also found his lack of strength. As long as the other party continued exploiting that weakness of his, he would be rendered completely helpless. Admit defeat, you aren't a match for me. Moosh's puppet shook his head. Admit defeat. Zhongxian frowned. It hadn't been easy for him to reach the 9th level. Was he really going to have to admit defeat and leave like that? That's right. In your current state, you won't be able to defeat me. However, as long as you work hard on your cultivation and reach Chrysalis Realm Pinnacle, it is very likely that I won't be a match for you then, Moosh's puppet said. Even though it had been able to easily defeat the young man before it, it knew that this wasn't a problem with the other party's talent or skill. As long as the other party raised his cultivation to Chrysalis Realm Pinnacle, it was very likely that it wouldn't be a match for him anymore. Zhongxian couldn't help but ask, you should have established the 9th floor in the Mountain of Records hoping that someone will be able to clear the trial, but is it really possible for one with a cultivation beneath half-saint to defeat you? If the other party was just an ordinary Saint Realm 1 Dan cultivator, his chances at victory would still have been considerable. However, Mu Kai was a master teacher, an expert who had founded the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy at that. His understanding of battle had reached an extremely profound level. It could be said that anyone who didn't possess strength rivaling him wouldn't stand a chance against him. Zhongxian cultivated the Heaven's Path divine art, quintuple incandescence golden body, and his soul. Yet, despite that, he was still unable to defeat the other party. He truly found it hard to believe that there would be another person in the world who could outdo him, but if that was truly the case, why would Musha bother creating a 9th level that no one would be able to clear? It is possible. Musha's puppet replied with a nod. Really? Zhongxian frowned doubtfully. You need not doubt my words, I am certain of that. There are many combat masters who are capable of this feat, and even Kongsha slew quite a number of Saint Realm experts before reaching half-saint back then, Musha's puppet said. Slew quite a number of Saint Realm experts before reaching half-saint. Zhongxian's eyes widened in astonishment. He knew that the other party meant killing with their own strength and not making use of external aids such as the Golden Origin Cauldron or the Byzantium Alios beast. To be able to slay Saint Realm experts. Was Kongsha already that formidable before reaching half-saint? Of course. If he wasn't able to accomplish such extraordinary feats, how could he possibly lead mankind in a war against the otherworldly demonic tribe? Musha's puppet replied nonchalantly. This. Zhongxian was taken aback. When he met Lu Cheng and Wu Shu back then, he had thought that combat masters were only that capable. However, it seemed like it was naive of him to gauge combat masters just based on those two. Admit defeat. You can't possibly win against me. There is no point stalling for time, Musha's puppet said, knowing that Zhongxian was only trying to earn some time to recuperate his zhenqi. You can return after you reach Chrysalis Realm Pinnacle. Perhaps you will wield sufficient strength to defeat me then. Musha's puppet didn't think that the other party would be able to defeat him with a cultivation of Chrysalis Realm Primary Stage. If that was really the case, he would be far more frightening than most combat masters he knew of. Return after I reach Chrysalis Realm Pinnacle? Zhongxian shook his head. There is no need for that. I can defeat you right now. Oh. Musha's puppet curiously gazed at Zhongxian. You don't believe me? Zhongxian chuckled softly. I can prove it to you. However, I will have to ask you to give me a moment. I will change my clothes before battling you once more. Chapter 911, Saint Ascension Decipher Change Clothes? Musha's puppet was stunned. What does changing your clothes have to do with whether you are able to defeat me or not? The clothes I am currently wearing were specially prepared by the Master Teacher Academy, and they are extremely valuable. With them on, it is inevitable that my movements will be restricted. Only after changing back into my Master Teacher robe will I be able to fight you with my full strength, Zhongxian explained. Hearing those words, Musha's puppet frowned and asked, Isn't the robe you are wearing a powerful artifact? Zhongxian was still wearing the robe that the Blacksmith School and Celestial Designer School had specially made for the inauguration ceremony. Not only was it tailored to fit him snugly, it was even a spirit pinnacle artifact that boasted incredible defense. The Academy had paid a hefty sum in order to complete it. With eyes as sharp as Musha's, he could tell that the robe was extraordinary from the very first sight. Even a pig could become a hero with that armor, and yet, the young man before him said that it lowered his fighting prowess. Wasn't that plain nonsense? It is indeed a powerful artifact, but in my humble opinion, I think comfortable clothes still make the best battle dress, Zhongxian replied with a smile. Pardon me, but I will have to ask Musha to turn around for a moment. I don't really like to expose my bare body to others. All right then. Shaking his head, Musha's puppet decided to just go along with Zhongxian and turn around. Actually, it was not completely unheard of for a cultivator to change clothes in preparation for a battle, but that was usually only for Terpsichoreans. Terpsichoreans utilized glamorous clothes to enhance their charisma so that they could better charm their opponent. Could the young man before it be a Terpsichorean? But even if that was the case, it was futile. Terpsichorean arts worked against the soul, but as a puppet, it didn't possess a soul. Besides, Terpsichores were usually beautiful ladies. For a man to be exerting his seductive charms toward it, Musha's puppet suddenly felt a nauseated sensation in his guts. Even though it was a puppet, it could almost feel its goosebumps rising. At that very moment, it heard a cold and slightly haughty voice speak. I'm done. Turning around, Musha's puppet saw that the young man before it had changed his previously eye-catching wear into a rather ordinary-looking robe. This. You really intend to fight me with just an ordinary master-teacher robe? Musha's puppet couldn't help but be taken aback. It could understand it if the other party had changed his clothes to a half-saint robe or something. After all, clothes could affect one's fighting prowess too. But to switch back to the perfectly ordinary master-teacher robe, it was just as if one had switched a spirit pinnacle sword to a perfect ordinary blade. No matter how one looked at it, wasn't the other party just handicapping himself? Are you really certain that you are trying to defeat me and not suffer a beating? Indeed. Zhongxian nodded as he gazed at the other party proudly with his hands behind his back. This ordinary robe is sufficient for me to subdue you. You seem really confident. Let's start then. Seeing how the young man before it had suddenly grown so arrogant right after changing clothes, the face of Musha's puppet darkened, and it clenched its fists tightly. Hoo-la! This time, Musha's puppet took the first move. Its fist surged forward with immense might that collapsed the air around it. In order to make the other party learn that his efforts were futile, it had utilized its full strength right from the start, making its attack far more powerful and threatening than before. Just what I wanted. The Zhongxian after changing his clothes stood on the spot in composure, showing not a sign of fear or respect. With a taunting smile, he retaliated with a punch of his own. Seeing that the young man was going to face its attack face-on, Moosh's puppet frowned. It had gained a clear grasp of the other party's strength from their short battle earlier, and it knew that it was impossible for the other party to withstand an attack of its full might. For the other party to face its punch head-on. Did the other party change his brain as well as his clothes? If its punch were to land squarely on him, he could very well die. At that moment, Moosh's puppet couldn't help but hesitate and consider whether or not it should retract a portion of the strength in its fist. However, before it could come to a decision, the two fists had already collided. In that instant, the eyes of Moosh's puppet narrowed. It was still lamenting over the arrogant decision of the young man to face it head-on a moment ago, but as soon as their fists connected, it immediately realized that something was amiss. It had expected to overwhelm the young man's punch in an instant, but what it encountered was a surge of devastating force pushing through its fist, leaving its entire body convulsing uncontrollably. Pang! It was truly fortunate that it hadn't retracted its strength. Even with its full might, it wasn't confident that it could emerge as the victor of this direct clash. Go! Bellowing furiously, a crescendoing creak sounded from the joints of Moosh's puppet as it gathered every single inch of power it wielded in its body to match the young man's fist. Humph! On the other hand, the young man opposite to it tilted his chin upwards and looked down on Moosh's puppet with a hint of disdain in his eyes. At the same time, the force exerted in his fist intensified. Pang! Before Moosh's puppet could even react, it was already overpowered and sent flying over a distance of several dozen meters through the air before crashing heavily into the wall. With a look of disbelief, Moosh's puppet stared at the young man standing haughtily in the center of the room, aghast. It was true that the young man had displayed an exceptional eye of discernment in the previous battle, identifying its flaws precisely and exploiting them promptly. However, the huge gap in the strength between them should have made it impossible for him to injure it at all. Why did it seem like he had turned into a wholly different person just by changing a set of clothes, sending him flying in a clash of brute strength? Furthermore, from the looks of it, it seemed like he hadn't even exerted his full might yet. It was inconceivable that there could be such a huge difference in a person within such a short span of time. Without any hesitation, Moosh's puppet immediately began to examine the young man before him from head to toe, but the latter's physical appearance and distinctive soul aura told it that it was still the same person as before. In other words, that fellow had really grown many times stronger just by changing a set of clothes. With his hands placed behind his back, the young man standing at the center of the room declared haughtily, "You have lost." It took a while before Moosh's puppet finally recovered, and it shook its head bitterly. "Congratulations on clearing the 9th level. You are the first master teacher to clear the mountain of records ever since its establishment." It was still unable to make sense out of what happened. Naturally, it didn't believe that a person could grow stronger just by changing a set of clothes, but a loss was still a loss. As the founder of the Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy, it wouldn't stoop so low as to deny this. On the other hand, the young man opposite to it simply waved his hands impatiently, acting as if it was a given that he would win. "You are the greatest talent our Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy has ever had since it was founded 10,000 years ago. As a reward for clearing the mountain of records, I will pass down this secret art, which I have held on to dearly for my entire life, Saint Ascension Decipher." Paying no heed to the young man's arrogance, Moosh's puppet chuckled softly as it took out a book and passed it over. "Saint Ascension Decipher?" the young man asked doubtfully. "Indeed." Moosh's puppet smiled. "As a master teacher, you must have at least heard of how Kongsha ascended to sainthood." "I have. According to what I know, he is a celestial saint," the young man replied with a nod. "It was said that when Kongsha made the leap from nascent saint to saint realm, he received the recognition of the heaven and became a celestial saint, and the Saint Ascension platform was testimony to that deed. He had been there himself, and it wasn't much of a secret. Indeed, he is a celestial saint." At this point, a bright gleam surfaced in the eyes of Moosh's puppet. A saint recognized by the heavens will not only possess strength superior to others, it will also serve as the foundation for him to reach heights far beyond others. Over the years, innumerable master teachers have attempted to emulate Kongshi's feat and become a celestial saint as well, but to date, none have achieved it. I happened to obtain this Saint Ascension decipher by some stroke of luck back in my time, and detailed within it is the process of how Kongsha cultivated to sainthood, and from it, I was able to compile a feasible cultivation technique. It isn't a guarantee to becoming a celestial saint, but if a cultivator cultivates it strictly, he will be able to strengthen his foundation and raise his strength before sainthood by at least twofold. Twofold, the young man exclaimed with widened eyes. Typically speaking, the strength increments for the rise of each stage and realm from half-saint to saint realm were fixed. Yet, to raise one's strength before sainthood by twofold. Just how strong must one's foundation be? If one were to achieve a breakthrough with such a strong cultivation foundation, even if one didn't receive the acknowledgement of the heavens, one would still wield strength far surpassing ordinary saint realm cultivator. Indeed, this Saint Ascension decipher does indeed have the ability to raise one's fighting prowess significantly. However, there is a fatal flaw to it as well. At which point, Musha's puppet shook its head. Due to the exceedingly strong foundation, it will be far harder for a practitioner of the technique to achieve a breakthrough compared to their counterpart. Back then, I was greedy to aim for the best, but as a result, I missed the golden growth period for me to advance my cultivation. As a result, my cultivation remained stagnant until my death, and this is my greatest regret. The young man fell silent. The other party was right. To gain something, one had to give up another thing in return. To raise one's strength by twofold before sainthood, it wasn't too difficult to imagine the strength of the cultivation foundation required for that. It was indeed good to have a strong foundation, but it also made it far more difficult to achieve a breakthrough. Take the Heaven's Path Divine Art for example, it had granted Zhongxian an incredibly strong foundation, which would allow him to reach greater heights in the future. But in exchange for that, he had to absorb more, far purer spiritual energy than others in order to advance his cultivation, and this was the main reason his progress had been slow. In fact, it seemed to have been even slower in recent days. It had nearly been 2 months, but he had only raised his cultivation by 4 realms. Just thinking about it was sufficient to leave his face reddening in shame. I will leave the final decision to you. In any case, you have 3 days to study this book, and what you are able to gain from it within this period of time will be dependent on yourself. Oblivious to Zhongxian's reddened face, Musha's puppet passed a book over. All right. The young man nodded and took the book. After which, he hesitated for a brief moment before saying, "Before studying the book, I would like to change my clothes once more. I will have to ask Musha to turn around for a moment." All right then. Musha's puppet was rendered speechless by how troublesome the young man before him was being, but eventually, it still chose to accede to the latter's request. After confirming that Musha had averted his gaze, the young man heaved a sigh of relief. With a thought, an identical figure materialized before him, and just by making eye contact for a brief instant, the materialized figure was able to get a sense of what had happened. "All right, clone. You should return for now," the materialized figure said with a wave of his hand. "Yes, main body," the young man replied before vanishing into thin air. Naturally, the materialized figure was the real Zhongxian, whereas the young man who had defeated Musha's puppet earlier was his clone. Just by trading 2 blows, Zhongxian could already tell that he wasn't a match for the other party. Thus, using changing clothes as an excuse, he made use of the opportunity to switch places with his clone. While the latter was not a particularly reliable figure to count on, his fighting prowess was indeed formidable. No matter how many breakthroughs Zhongxian had made, he was still overpowered by his clone without fail each time, smashed mercilessly into the ground. Even if Zhongxian himself wasn't a match for Musha's puppet, he was still confident that his puppet would be able to subdue the latter with ease. And as expected, his clone didn't let him down. He had successfully defeated Musha's clone and cleared the 9th level. But in a sense, this couldn't really be considered cheating either. After all, his clone could also be considered a part of himself too, so there was no doubt that the strength of his clone was his strength as well. Nevertheless, Zhongxian still chose to do it discreetly so as to prevent the existence of his clone from leaking out somehow. After all, it was a trump card he could use in dire situations, and it wouldn't do for his enemies to learn about it in advance. After making the swap, Zhongxian informed Mu Shi that he was done before turning his attention to the book in his hand. Chapter 9:12, Grades of Origin Cause. In the blink of an eye, Zhongxian had already gained a deep understanding of the content of the book. Detailed in the front were the experiences Kong Shi had undergone before ascending to sainthood, and the content was rather similar to the writings left on the cliff face on the Saint Ascension platform, just that the descriptions were more vivid, seemingly putting the reader himself into the very situations depicted through the words. It's so complicated. A frown slowly appeared on Zhongxian's face. He had thought that the Saint Ascension decipher would just be a simple cultivation technique that he would be able to master and raise his strength significantly just by following the instructions precisely. However, it wasn't that simple. A saint that even the heavens had acknowledged couldn't possibly only possess denser zhenqi and greater might. One's psyche must also be strengthened beyond the limits of an average cultivator as well. In essence, strengthening one's psyche could be considered to be tempering one's mind. Only with a strong psyche would one be able to keep a broad perspective of the world, allowing one to see and advance further. The mind and body of humans were connected in the most intricate of ways. If one could achieve a state of mind capable of harnessing a world within it, one's dantian would naturally expand to allow the harnessing of more zhenqi as well. As it watched the young man before it study the book in his hands seriously, Mu Shi's puppet suddenly spoke up. In the chrysalis realm, otherwise known as the embryonic core realm and golden core realm, a cultivator will gather their cultivation and mold it into an origin core, also known as a golden core. Once successfully completed, it will merge together with the cultivator's body, allowing them to surpass their limits and advance to a height beyond mortals. Since you have already cultivated to this realm, I believe that you should have a deep understanding of it as well. Zhongxian nodded. In essence, the chrysalis realm was the stage where a cultivator condensed the zhenqi in his body into a core, transforming it from a liquid into a solid, thus allowing the cultivator to store even more zhenqi within their body. Once the origin core was formed, they would be able to fuse their body with it in order to advance further toward the threshold of sainthood. Even though Zhongxian hadn't gathered sufficient chrysalis realm cultivation technique manuals to compile a complete Heaven's Path divine art, a zhenqi whirlpool had already formed in his dantian, gathering the zhenqi throughout his body toward it. With some effort, it would only be a matter of time before he managed to form an origin core. If one were to cultivate normally, one should be able to gather the zhenqi within one's body to cultivate an origin core swiftly. However, the resulting origin core would only be that of the lowest tier, known as a third-grade origin core. Mu Shi's puppet explained. Third-grade origin core? There are differing grades to origin cores. Zhongxian was perplexed. He had gathered innumerable books spanning across multiple occupations in the Master Teacher Academy, but he had never read of anything like that before. There are, just that very few people are aware of it, Mu Shi's puppet replied. This grading system was proposed by a student of Kong Shi, and he intended to make it public knowledge to all cultivators. However, Kong Shi forbade him from doing so, and over the years, fewer and fewer people have retained the knowledge of this grading system. Kong Shi forbade him? Zhongxian questioned in astonishment. Wasn't Kong Shi the world's teacher, the man who founded the Master Teacher Pavilion and imparted his heritage to all of mankind? Why would such a person prevent the impartation of such vital knowledge? It's in view of the welfare of mankind that he made such a decision. Mu Shi's puppet replied with a deep sigh. With some hard work, an average cultivator will be able to form a third-grade origin core with ease. However, the same cannot be said about second-grade origin cores. Not only will it require the devotion of a great amount of resources for its cultivation, the guidance of a skilled teacher is also necessary. Otherwise, the slightest mistake can easily render one's efforts futile. To make a comparison, the resources required to form a second-grade origin core are at least tenfold of what is required to cultivate a third-grade origin core, and that is a price that mankind cannot afford to pay. More importantly, not everyone has the talent to successfully cultivate a second-grade origin core even with ample resources. It is highly demanding on one's talent and psyche as well. To make things worse, there is a heavy price to pay for failure. Should an attempt to cultivate a second-grade origin core fail, one's origin core may fall apart, thus crippling one's cultivation. In the worst-case scenario, one might even face instantaneous death. If the news regarding the grades of origin cores becomes known, many master teachers would surely take the risk in an attempt to raise their fighting prowess to greater heights. While some might succeed, many more would find their cultivation going berserk and possibly end up dead. On top of that will place a greater strain on our finite cultivation resources, this resulting in the weakening of the forces of humanity as a whole. Zhong Xian fell into a moment of contemplation before eventually nodding in agreement. The other party was right. Cultivating a higher-grade origin core was no easy feat, requiring one to pay a heavier price and bear a higher degree of risk. From the very start, cultivators were limited by their inherent talent. If a person who was lacking ample capability were to attempt to cultivate an origin core beyond their means, it would only end in disaster. It was just like a greedy snake attempting to devour an elephant. Despite its relatively small size, it still chose to prey on a target far larger than itself. In this case, failure was just a small issue. If things went wrong, the snake could very well find itself trampled to death instead. This was the same for the cultivation of origin core. But if a cultivator were to intentionally opt to cultivate a third-grade origin core, it could create an impression that they had veered down the wrong path, and their cultivation was imperfect and inferior to others. Such subconscious thoughts could possibly lead to an opening within their mind and limit their future accomplishments. But limited by his talent, the cultivator would be unable to cultivate the second-grade origin core either way. As the saying goes, ignorance is bliss. Sometimes, having a choice might not necessarily be beneficial. A higher-grade origin core grants a cultivator strength superior to their peers, but the price in order to do so is sufficient to groom a Saint Realm 2 Dan or even 3 Dan expert. From mankind's viewpoint, it is clear which is preferable of the two. Mu Shi's puppet continued. It was due to his concern of humanity's future that Kong Shi decided to make such a decision. From the very beginning, the primary responsibility of master teachers has been to bolster the forces of mankind and bring it to greater heights. In view of that, it is not a big trade-off for the average strength of our cultivators to be slightly weaker. Indeed. Zhong Xian nodded. This secret was simply too shocking, and it could easily cause a huge uproar among the master teachers if it were to leak out. However, other than bringing huge pressure and stress upon them, there was really not much tangible benefit to it. As compared to that, why not just remain silent and leave things as they are? Besides, the primary role of a master teacher was to impart knowledge and pass down the heritage of the predecessors, not fighting. As such, it wasn't really a big deal whether what they had cultivated was a third-grade origin core or not. In any case, with only the deep understanding of cultivation techniques and battle techniques that master teachers wielded, they would still be considered the most powerful occupation in the world, unmatched by any. After understanding the story, Zhong Xian continued his questioning. You said earlier that normal cultivators will only cultivate a third-grade origin core. Since that is the case, what will a cultivator who has cultivated the second-grade origin core be like? A second-grade origin core. The most relatable example to highlight the prowess of a second-grade origin core is the combat masters. Mu Shi's puppet replied. Combat masters. UN combat masters need not study supporting occupations, so they will be able to devote their efforts to furthering their cultivation and battle techniques. The members of the Combat Master Hall are also carefully picked, so their talents are likely on par as well. Considering that the Combat Master Hall is heavily financed by the Master Teacher Pavilion and mankind as a whole, it possesses the ample resources too. As such, it isn't too difficult for its members to cultivate second-grade origin cores. At this point, Mu Shi's puppet paused for a brief moment before continuing. In truth, the reason Kong Shi kept the Combat Master Hall separate from the Master Teacher Pavilion was to pass on the knowledge of the grades of origin cores. Realization dawned upon Zhong Xian. It was no wonder Wu Shu, despite being at Chrysalis Realm Pinnacle as well, was able single-handedly subdue Hu Yaro, Shui Zhenyang, Long Tsungyue, and Dongxin simultaneously. It was not that the four of them were weak or lacking in talent, but there was simply a disparity in the grade of their origin cores. Due to that, the purity of their zhenqi and their strength were inferior to wushu, so it was no wonder that they had been defeated so easily. But if even combat masters only have second-grade origin cores, what about first-grade origin cores? Zhong Xian asked. If even the powerful combat masters only possessed second-grade origin cores, how powerful would an individual who possessed a first-grade origin core be? So far, first-grade origin cores are only known to exist in the legends. It has been far too long since anyone succeeded. In any case, I have never seen anyone with one before. Rumor has it that Kongsha managed to cultivate a first-grade origin core back then, but of course, as such details are not written in the book, I can't say for sure either, Musha's puppet replied. Only known to exist in the legends? Zhong Xian was taken aback. Indeed. In fact, I believe that a first-grade origin core is the requirement to becoming a celestial saint. That is the reason I wanted to cultivate a first-grade origin core, and I spent many centuries working toward it. But in the end, my efforts only ended with a second-grade advanced origin core, Musha's puppet said with a bitter smile. Several centuries, nearly half of his entire life, he had dedicated to this dream of his, but he had only met with failure in the end. There was no one who wouldn't feel regret in his position. Second grade advanced. UN. Each grade of origin core can be further subdivided into primary, advanced, and pinnacle. In order to form a second grade advanced origin core, I had to pay a hefty price, go through innumerable near-death situations, and invest a huge portion of my time. Even though I was able to rival opponents beyond my cultivation realm after successfully cultivating it, my rivals whose talents were beneath mine back then had already reached Saint Realm 4 Dan or 5 Dan. It was then that I realized that I had erred. If only I had advanced as an ordinary Saint Realm cultivator. In order to cultivate my origin core, I squandered the golden period for a cultivator to advance their cultivation, which limited my final achievement. In the end, my footsteps terminated at Saint Realm 1 Dan Pinnacle. Can you understand the frustrations I felt then? At that point, I finally realized why Kongsha chose to conceal the news. Those whose talent is insufficient, even if they were to achieve success at the end of the road, the effort and time invested into it are simply not worth it. Can a Saint Realm 1 Dan Pinnacle cultivator possibly be able to contribute more to humanity than a Saint Realm 4 Dan cultivator? I think the answer is pretty clear. Musha's puppet could only sigh endlessly in regret. Even the longest living saint in the world was unable to live past the age of 2000, and he had dedicated an entire 700 years of his early years on cultivating his origin core, missing the golden years for advancing his cultivation. Eventually, his bodily functions deteriorated, and it was too late for him to start pushing his cultivation. On the other hand, those whom he had competed with in his earlier years and outshone had all become Saint Realm 4 Dan and 5 Dan experts. So what if his origin core was of a higher grade than the others? So what if he was invincible among those of his cultivation realm? Could he possibly challenge an opponent 3 to 4 realms stronger than him? That was clearly infeasible. Eventually, he could only conclude that this was a technique for those who possessed the greatest of talents. Anyone beneath that would only be wasting their time and potential. As such, I created the Mountain of Records in order to assess the fighting prowess of the students in the Master Teacher Academy. Only those who were able to defeat the Saint Realm 1 Danmi with a cultivation beneath Half-Saint would be qualified to learn of this news. Those are the people who possess greater talent than me. They might just be able to successfully advance their origin core to greater heights and possibly accomplish what I have failed at. Musha said with a sharp glint in his eyes. The fact that you were able to defeat me with just a cultivation of Chrysalis Realm primary stage shows that you are an incredibly talented person. A genius of your caliber probably doesn't even appear once in 10,000 years. If you cultivate this Saint Ascension Decipher, you might just be able to successfully cultivate a first-grade origin core and possibly attempt to become a celestial saint. Seeing Musha's puppet's heated eyes, Zhong Xian was stunned. Me. Chapter 913, Cultivating the Saint Ascension Decipher. Zhong Xian didn't expect Musha to have such confidence in him. A first-grade origin core was great, but if it would take him several years to do so, it was clearly not worth the effort. For one, if he didn't become a 9-star master teacher before he reached 30, the innate fetal poison would act up, and he would breathe his last breath. If so, what would be the point in cultivating a higher-grade origin core? As such, despite how high of a regard Mu She had for a first-grade origin core, he didn't have much of an interest in it. It would be best if he could obtain it, but if not, that was fine, too. Indeed. With talent like yours, you definitely stand a good chance. But of course, to succeed, you will need a fair bit of luck and aptitude too. Mu She's puppet nodded in response. There were countless outstanding geniuses in the history of the master-teacher continent, but not a single one of them had successfully cultivated a first-grade origin core since Kongsha. Talent was important, but luck and intelligence were vital as well. Luck is beyond our control, but there is a way to take a peek into one's intelligence. If you can learn the Saint Ascension Decipher and gather 7 strands of Junchi together without them collapsing within 3 days, there is a very good chance that you will advance beyond advanced second-grade origin core in the future. If you can't achieve this much, I will have to advise that you not take this route. 7 strands of Junchi. Zhong Xian muttered as he recalled what he had previously read in the Saint Ascension Decipher. In truth, cultivating a third-grade origin core could already be considered the limit of a chrysalis realm cultivator's capability. Putting aside that cultivating anything beyond that was nigh impossible, even if a cultivator were to succeed in doing so, it was likely that their origin core could still collapse due to their inability to wield the power. In view of this problem, the Saint Ascension Decipher worked in a manner that forcefully widened the window in which a cultivator could nurture their origin core from just chrysalis realm to half-saint and nascent saint as well. In other words, as long as the cultivator hadn't made the breakthrough to saint realm, they could continue to gather Junchi into their origin core and strengthen it. This was probably how Kongsha built an extremely powerful foundation, such that even the heavens acknowledged his existence when he made the breakthrough to sainthood. Usually, cultivating an origin core involved gathering one's Junchi into a spherical shape and refining it bit by bit, turning it from a pseudo-core to a temporal core, then to a corporeal core, and finally a golden core. The 7 strands of Junchi that Mu She's puppet had spoken of referred to the structure in crafting the pseudo-core. The essence of the Saint Ascension Decipher lay in gathering one's Junchi in the form of threads and putting them together in a unique structure in order to construct an origin core. To make an analogy, cultivating a normal origin core would be like building a house by stacking rocks together. It was easier and more convenient to build a house in such a manner, but it would be unstable and unaesthetic. What the Saint Ascension Decipher did was give a blueprint to the house so as to elevate the quality of the ultimate product. In the Saint Ascension Decipher, 7 strands of Junchi put together was termed a knot. Using the prior analogy, these knots could be considered the bricks of the house. Once one was capable of building stable knots, one would be able to start accumulating them and begin building the structure. The theory was simple, but the difficulty lay in condensing one's Junchi into thin threads and constructing a structure with them without it dissipating. Not only must one possess a strong soul, one's control over Junchi must also reach an astounding level in order to succeed. Indeed. You should start reading now. As long as you can succeed within 3 days, I will impart my experiences and insights regarding the Saint Ascension Decipher to you. With those, at least the blind man I was back then, fumbling to search for a road, you should be able to avoid many detours, and that should save you many years. Mu She's puppet said. Reading. There is no need for that now. Are the 7 strands of condensed Junchi you speak of something like this? Zhong Xian raised his finger, and with a light tap, a strand of Junchi appeared in the air. Just as he was about to continue, he suddenly saw Mu She's puppet staring at him with eyes widened in astonishment, seemingly on the verge of fainting. With a quivering voice, Mu She's puppet asked, "Why you are drawing Junchi out of your body directly? And even maintaining fine control over it at that? What is there to be shocked about? I was already able to do this shortly after I started cultivating. It really isn't a big deal." Seeing the other party making a huge fuss out of the matter like a countryside bumpkin who hadn't seen the world, Zhong Xian shook his head. To think that he was the founder of the Master Teacher Academy at that, Did he really need to be so surprised over something as elementary as this? Drawing junqi out of one's body, it was not like that was anything difficult to do. Back when he had just started cultivating, he had already injected his junqi into the bodies of others to clear their meridian blockages. Manipulating them into fine threads, he could already do so when he was still at Fighter Ream. If he couldn't do so as a chrysalis realm cultivator, he really should just knock his head against a wall and die. This. Noticing the other party's disdainful gaze, Musha's puppet nearly spurted blood. It was not difficult to draw junqi out of one's body, but to prevent it from dissipating and even control it finely to form thin threads, that was the difficult part. In order to achieve that, one would have to meet two fundamental prerequisites. Firstly, one's junqi must be extremely pure, at least reaching superior quality. Secondly, one's soul must be powerful enough to draw soul energy out of one's body. Otherwise, it was impossible for one to control one's junqi remotely. It could be said that the young man's control over junqi had reached an unbelievable level. Even he wasn't capable of such a feat when he first reached Saint Realm back then. Just as he was shocked beyond words, he saw the young man before him continuing to tap his finger in the air. Hoo. The second strand of junqi, third strand. Before long, 7 strands of junqi were already floating in the air, wriggling about like tiny snakes as they were manipulated to overlap with one another. Musha's puppet spoke hoarsely. He is actually able to control 7 strands of junqi simultaneously. Condensing one's junqi into strands and controlling it remotely out of the body, this was a feat that even most Saint Realm experts were incapable of. Yet, not only did this fellow succeed, he was even doing it with 7 strands simultaneously. This was way too much. Are you sure that you are only at Chrysalis Realm primary stage? Could it be that you are a Saint Realm pinnacle expert or some disciple of Kongsha who suddenly decided to challenge my mountain of records on a whim to mess with me? Soon, the 7 strands of junqi were put together perfectly to form a sesame-sized junqi ball in the air. It twirled gently, not dissipating in the least. After this was done, Zhongxian raised his head and said, "What you mean is that as long as I create and gather such little balls in the dantian, I should be able to form a pseudo-core?" "Yes." Exhaling deeply, Musha suppressed his shock and nodded. The Saint Ascension decipher was the condensation of junqi into threads before putting them together to form those little balls. By gathering many of such little balls, one would eventually be able to form one's origin core. An origin core formed in such a manner was much more stable and powerful than a normal one, just that the effort to achieve it was far too great. If that wasn't the case, Musha wouldn't have spent several hundred years to succeed either. Isn't it quite simple? I don't think anyone would need 3 days for that. Zhongxian had thought that his comprehension of the technique was wrong, but in the end, it turned out that it was really that simple. Disappointed, he shook his head. If someone needed 3 days in order to create this, were they even qualified to be considered a genius? He might as well knock himself out with a blob of tofu. Embarrassed by how easily the other party had achieved it, Musha's puppet replied with an awkward smile, Perhaps you have cultivated some technique to condense your junqi, which granted you particular aptitude in this." It had intended to use that as a test to assess the other party's capability, but who knew that the other party would clear it so easily? It felt like a fool for even proposing it in the first place. In its years roaming the world and serving as the principal of the Master Teacher Academy, it had met countless geniuses. But the young man before it was a true monster. "Perhaps," Zhongxian replied nonchalantly. He hadn't cultivated any technique to specially condense his junqi, but his Heaven's Path junqi did possess a purity far above that of superior junqi, which allowed him to easily accomplish what others would struggle to do. On top of that, he was also a soul oracle, so the strength of his soul and his control over his soul energy were extraordinary as well. Since that's the case, let's not waste any more time then. For the time being, let me see how many deciphers you can build, Musha's puppet said. Since the other party was able to do it to such an extent, there was no point assessing his talent anymore. It would be far more efficient to push him to his limit and see how far he could go. As for the deciphers, that was actually the central and most important phase of the cultivation of the Saint Ascension decipher. 7 zhenqi strands together were known as a knot, 7 knots together were known as a bundle, and 7 bundles together were known as a decipher. In other words, one had to condense and put 343 strands of zhenqi together without any error in order to form a decipher. Back then, when he was still at Chrysalis Realm, he managed to form 6 deciphers before nearly losing control of it. Left with no choice, he could only make the breakthrough to Half-Saint. For those who possessed subpar talent and a weak soul, it was possible that they might be unable to cultivate even a single decipher. The other party did possess exquisite control over his zhenqi, but as one who had once cultivated the Saint Ascension decipher himself, Mu Shi knew the difficulties involved. The more zhenqi strands that came into play, the more dangerous it was, and the more likely one could lose control of it. This was similar to stacking cards up. Stacking 1 or 2 of them was simple, but the higher it grew, the more dangerous it would be. The slightest error could make the entire structure collapse. As long as a cultivator was willing to spend some time to refine their zhenqi, cultivating a knot was possible for most. Cultivating a bundle would be far more troublesome than that, and cultivating a decipher would be impossible if one didn't possess fine control over their zhenqi and great patience. As talented as the other party was, he was still too young. Furthermore, his cultivation was only at Chrysalis Realm primary stage. In Mu Shi's view, it would be great if the other party could form even one. How many deciphers I can build? Zhong Xian pondered for a moment before nodding. Let me give it a try. Honestly speaking, he also had no idea how many deciphers he could make until he tried it out for himself. Raising both of his arms, he thrusted his 10 fingers out. Tzzzz. In the blink of an eye, hundreds of strands of zhenqi spilled forth from the tip of his fingers, wriggling excitedly like little dragons. He simultaneously condensed so many strands of zhenqi. Mu Shi's puppet was still wondering how long it would take for the man before him to successfully cultivate a decipher when it saw such a sight, and it nearly fainted on the spot. To easily condense several hundred surges of zhenqi into strands simultaneously, just how powerful was his soul? Putting aside now, it wasn't even close to achieving this back when it was at his peak. But the shock wasn't over yet. Not too long later, the young man moved his fingers slightly, and the 100 strands of zhenqi began entangling together to form a sphere of zhenqi around the size of a grain of rice. At which, the young man turned to it and asked doubtfully, "This is a decipher, right?" Chapter 914, Reconstructing the Cultivation Technique. Mu Shi's puppet hurried forward to take a closer look. The other party's zhenqi sphere wasn't big, but it carried a slight glow with the hues of a myriad colors, reminiscent of a rainbow, leaving one's gaze fixated on it. More than 300 strands of zhenqi were intertwined with one another, layer after layer, in a unique structure. It was so perfect that it couldn't find the slightest mistake to criticize. Back then, it had taken it nearly 100 years of study, diligence, and experimentation in order to refine the precise distance that each strand should have from one another before it had succeeded in forming the first decipher. On the other hand, it had only been 10 minutes since the other party had picked up the book, and he hadn't even flipped open the pages at all. Yet, somehow, he was already able to create a decipher far more perfect and beautiful than his. Just how? At this moment, Mu Shi's puppet couldn't help but feel that the 100 years it had spent on studying the Saint Ascension decipher had gone to waste. While it was still reeling in shock, the young man opposite to it continued flicking his fingers, and a massive wall of zhenqi strands abruptly appeared before it, concealing its sight. A slight buzzing sound echoed in the room, and before long, dozens of zhenqi spheres were already floating before its eyes. Hong long. The next moment, the young man abruptly clasped his hands together, and a deafening explosion sounded. The dozens of zhenqi spheres gathered together to form one around the size of a longan. This works too. Mu Shi's puppet gulped as it felt as if it was going to go insane. The energy contained within each decipher was great enough to be considered a miniature bomb. As such, it was imperative to be extremely careful when putting them together, or else the slightest touch could result in devastating consequences. Back then, it had spent 5 years just to put 2 deciphers together, paying careful heed to the distance and strength, fearing that it would make a mistake. On the other hand, this young man had actually just clasped his hands, and the dozens of decipher had melded together with nary a problem. Just how deep of an understanding and control of Zhenqi must the young man before him possess to be able to achieve this? Watching how easily the young man achieved feats that had taken it great effort and time, it couldn't help but think that it had cultivated a fake Saint Ascension decipher. After forming the long-incised Zhenqi sphere, Zhongxian asked with a frown, "Is this how it works? It doesn't seem really difficult. How did you spend several centuries on it?" It was such a simple method of condensing and arranging Zhenqi, yet the founder of the Master Teacher Academy had actually spent a few hundred years on it. Was this for real? Wasn't his talent way too bad? Cough cough. This isn't important. With twitching lips, Musha's puppet hurriedly shook its head. The talent and capability that it had taken pride in and others had admired it for felt like they weren't even worth a mention before this young man. This experience had left it so traumatized that it could still brag about his talents and capability before others, but before this young man, it felt like they weren't even worth a mention at all. It felt such a strong feeling of defeat that it couldn't find the courage to speak anymore. Examining the dozens of decipher the young man had created, regardless of whether it was the strength, distance, or stability, they were all beyond his. Even if it had attempted this at its peak, it would still have been unable to do it any better than the other party. It could be said that the other party's understanding of Saint Ascension decipher had already surpassed it. In that moment, however, a voice suddenly disrupted its thoughts. Something is wrong. This Saint Ascension decipher might seem to be very steady, but there are still many flaws in it. It is still a long way off from being considered the most stable structure, the young muttered with a deep frown. It was true that the current Saint Ascension decipher could make the pseudo-core and temporal core that one cultivated more stable and stronger, but through the library of Heaven's Path, Zhongxian still noticed many mistakes that could possibly result in one's undoing. The Saint Ascension decipher was an incredible technique, but it was still a far way off from becoming a Heaven's Path cultivation technique. If only I could find some cultivation techniques to perfect it, Zhongxian fell into deep thought. Accustomed to the Heaven's Path techniques, he really couldn't bring himself to cultivate a technique riddled with flaws. This was similar to how a person used to eating delicacies and donning fine clothes would find it hard to swallow dry bread and rough fabric. It seems like I should search for some chrysalis realm, half-saint, and nascent saint cultivation technique manuals in the Academy's cultivation compendium, Zhongxian thought as he rubbed his glabella in distress. He was the principal who had been granted the greatest degree of authority in the Master Teacher Academy's history. Regardless of which facility he wished to access, there was no one who could stop him. Perhaps, he might be able to perfect the Saint Ascension decipher through the books in the Academy. Hearing Zhongxian's words, Musha's puppet shook his head. I know that there are flaws in this cultivation technique, but it is already the crystallization of the wisdom of countless predecessors. Even 9-star master teachers dared not claim that the cultivation technique they had created was impeccable. The Saint Ascension decipher had been further refined by countless experts over the years, and while there were still many flaws with it, it was practically impossible that anyone would be able to see through it and exploit it against them. Even if there was a person who could, they would have to be at least an 8-star master teacher, and against such an opponent, defeat was guaranteed regardless of whether the flaw existed or not. Indeed. Naturally, Zhongxian also understood the logic behind it. Shaking his head, he was just about to change the subject when Musha's puppet suddenly continued speaking. Not everyone is a Kongsha. If only we could find the cultivation technique manual he left behind back then, we would be spared a great deal of effort. The cultivation technique manual Kongsha left behind? Zhongxian was taken aback. Back when he was at the Saint Ascension platform, he had encountered a sliver of Kongsha's soul, and the latter had given him his personal handwriting, saying that there was a cultivation technique contained inside and that he might be able to comprehend it if he were to study it carefully. Zhongxian hadn't paid much heed to it, but the words of Musha's puppet suddenly sparked some thoughts in his mind. Could it be the cultivation technique that Kongsha was referring to was the Saint Ascension decipher? The Saint Ascension platform was the ground where Kongsha had ascended to sainthood, so the cultivation technique he had left behind there should be related to that. If he could obtain Kongsha's cultivation technique and merge it together with the Saint Ascension decipher he had in hand, he might just be able to form a Heaven's Path cultivation technique. Otherwise, he should still be able to make up for most flaws contained in the current Saint Ascension decipher. As long as the number of flaws dropped to an acceptable range, he would be able to pinch his nose and tolerate it. With such thoughts in mind, he flicked his wrist and took out a scroll. Flipping it open, what he saw left his lips twitching uncontrollably. He had forgotten that the writing had been devoured by Vicious. That fellow had consumed parts of the writing on 2 occasions, leaving only a third of it behind. Even if there was a cultivation technique contained inside, it was probably already incomplete at this point in time. What the heck was this? If he had known earlier, he never would have allowed Vicious to do that. Just as Zhongxian was boiling with frustration, he suddenly heard the quivering voice of Mu Shi's puppet. That item in your hand, could it be Kong Shi's personal handwriting? Thinking that there was no need to hide it, Zhongxian nodded. That's right. Can you allow me to take a look? Mu Shi's puppet asked anxiously. Of course. Zhongxian threw the scroll over casually. Be careful. Seeing how casually the young man treated Kong Shi's personal handwriting, Mu Shi's puppet nearly died of a heart attack. With a frightfully pale face, it hurriedly caught the scroll and held it gently. There was no master teacher who didn't carry an inherent trust and respect for Kong Shi. If one was so lucky as to obtain Kong Shi's personal handwriting, they would surely treasure it dearly, unwilling to allow the slightest dirt or scratch appear on it. Yet, this fellow threw it about as if it was nothing much. It was hard to tell whether he had that strong a heart or he just simply didn't care for it. Opening the scroll gently, the eyelids of Mu Shi's puppet twitched. Why does it seem like there is a huge chunk of words missing in the scroll? Oh, it was already like that when I obtained it. Perhaps it has been left for too long, Zhongxian replied without his face turning red in the least. Left for too long? Hearing that insincere response, Mu Shi's puppet was rendered speechless. Nevertheless, since the other party was unwilling to speak, it chose not to ask on. Soon, it finished examining the scroll, and with a look of agitation, it asked, "Is this the insight Kong Shi left on the Saint Ascension platform?" It had been to the Saint Ascension platform on multiple occasions back when it was younger, and it could recite the entire insight word for word fluently. There were a few words here and there different from the ones he remembered seeing on the cliff face, but otherwise, it was identical. In response to the question from Mu Shi's puppet, Zhongxian nodded. The insight written personally by Kong Shi. If I had found this back then, I would surely have been able to gain a deeper understanding of Saint Ascension decipher. Studying the remaining words on the scroll carefully, Mu Shi's puppet couldn't help but feel as if its horizons were being stretched. It could remember the content word for word, but when paired with Kong Shi's handwriting, the feeling it gave was completely different, seemingly guiding its understanding of it. If it were to work based on its comprehension from the insight on this scroll, it might just be able to come up with a cultivation technique far superior to the current Saint Ascension decipher. Compile. While Mu Shi's puppet was busy admiring in Kong Shi's scroll, Zhongxian's consciousness was immersed in the library of Heaven's Path, compiling Kong Shi's insight and the Saint Ascension decipher together. A short moment later, a brand new book emerged. Flipping it open, Zhongxian took a look, and before long, he shook his head. The insight that Kong Shi had left behind consisted only of the insights he had when attempting a breakthrough to Saint Realm. It wasn't a real cultivation technique. As such, the resulting product from compiling it with the Saint Ascension decipher was only a pile of incomprehensible gibberish. Zhongxian had only decided to give it a try in the hope that he might just be lucky, but of course, perfecting the Saint Ascension decipher was indeed not that easy. Sighing deeply, Zhongxian was just about to give up when a thought suddenly struck him. Even if I can't compile a perfect version, I can always work on it bit by bit. As long as I study the insights Kong Shi had when he made his breakthrough and match them to the corresponding content in the Saint Ascension decipher to refine it, I should be able to improve it significantly. There was no cultivation technique contained within the insight, but the process and sensations that Kong Shi experienced were clearly detailed in it. Through it, Zhongxian would be able to deduce the Zhenqi circulation pathways, thus reverse engineering the cultivation technique Kong Shi intended to pass down Typically speaking, a certain sensation could be triggered by hundreds or even thousands of Junshi circulation pathways, making it nigh impossible to reverse engineer the process. However, Zhong Xian was different. Possessing the library of Heaven's Path, he could easily determine whether his deduction was right or not. By putting together the correct pathways, he would be able to derive the complete Junshi circulation pathway. I should give it a try. Diving into it without any hesitation, Zhong Xian sat cross-legged on the ground and began deconstructing Kong Shi's insight. Chapter 9:15. Time to study. Zhong Xian had thought that it would be easy and that he could complete the reverse engineering very quickly. However, who knew that by the time he opened his eyes once more, an entire day would have already passed? Getting to his feet to stretch his back, Zhong Xian massaged his glabella. Even with a strong constitution like his, he still couldn't help but feel like someone had smashed a brick into his head after an entire day of heavy thinking. However, it was fortunate that hard work never lied. After an entire day of effort, he had successfully deduced a new version of Saint Ascension decipher. It sure is a pity. If Vicious hadn't consumed 2/3 of the writing, I might have been able to create a flawless technique. In the process of deconstructing Kong Shi's insight, he realized that the intent contained within Kong Shi's calligraphy was the key to reverse engineering the cultivation technique. However, the Library of Heaven's Path had only replicated the content, so Zhong Xian only had 1/3 of it to work with. With 2/3 of the intent missing, it was inevitable that the Saint Ascension decipher that he eventually deduced would be flawed. There are still 3 flaws. It is similar to the quintuple incandescence golden body. I will require certain artifacts to serve as catalysts in order to achieve a breakthrough to half-saint, nascent saint, and saint rel. Exhaling deeply, Zhong Xian shook his head. Even though it would be troublesome to gather those artifacts, the current version he had deduced was at a completely different level from the Saint Ascension decipher Mu Shi's puppet had given him. Mu Shi's puppet walked up to Zhong Xian and asked, "What's wrong? Did you have a stroke of inspiration?" Yesterday, shortly after it received Kong Shi's writing, the other party had suddenly sat down and fallen into deep thought. Perhaps, the other party had also noticed that the scroll contained the key to refining the Saint Ascension decipher further. "I did manage to comprehend something," Zhong Xian replied with a smile. Stroking its beard, Mu Shi's puppet said, with eyes gleaming in excitement, "Not bad. After studying the scroll, I also managed to comprehend something as well. Why don't we exchange our comprehensions? Perhaps, we might be able to refine the Saint Ascension decipher further." Sensing the confidence in the other party's words, Zhong Xian couldn't help but ask, "Oh? May I know what Mu Shi comprehended? I feel that using 7 Junshi strands to form a knot is wrong. However, I have yet to deduce how many strands are required in order to perfect it." Soon, Mu Shi's puppet swiftly revealed the comprehensions it had. On the other hand, hearing the other party's comprehension, Zhong Xian couldn't help but shake his head. He had thought that the other party's comprehensions could possibly give him the inspiration to correct the 3 remaining flaws in the technique, but it seemed like he was putting his expectations too high. The other party's understanding of the technique was still at a superficial level, a far way off from matching his freshly deduced Saint Ascension decipher. "What about you? What did you comprehend? Why don't you share it with me so that we can analyze it together? You might be more talented than me, but in terms of intelligence, I am confident that I won't lose to anyone." Mu Shi's puppet chuckled confidently. Against the top-notch geniuses of the Master Teacher Academy, its talent was indeed unspectacular. There were a handful of principals who were more talented than it, such as Principal Mo Liuzhen. However, in terms of intelligence, he was definitely ranked among the top. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to compile the experiences of those before him and refine the Saint Ascension decipher, cultivating his origin core to advanced 2nd grade. One must know that very few master teachers had managed to achieve this feat. As such, he had the utmost confidence in this field. Within the span of a day, he didn't think that the other party would be able to fare much better than him. Not knowing how he should speak of the matter, Zhong Xian hesitated for a moment before grabbing a brush and an empty book and swiftly writing down a simplified version of the newly deduced Saint Ascension decipher, which anyone could cultivate, and passed it over. This is what I have comprehended over the past day. You can take a look at it. This is what you comprehended. Lowering its gaze to take a look, the body of Moosh's puppet suddenly began trembling uncontrollably, and it nearly fell to the ground. It had thought that it had managed to comprehend a lot within a single day, but compared to the other party, its feat was not even a drop in the ocean. It was as if two rivaling authors had started on their work simultaneously, and while one had just confirmed the name of the protagonist, the other had already finished the entire book. This was the overwhelming frustration that it felt at that very moment. It was barely at the starting point, but the other party had already deduced the most correct cultivation technique. The difference was so great that it felt as if it was about to suffer a mental breakdown. How could the world be so unfair as to allow for there to be such great difference between two people? Thinking back about what it had just shared with the other party, it felt so embarrassed that it felt tempted to drill a hole in the ground and hide itself for eternity to come. Zhongshe is indeed a man of great talent. I am impressed. After learning about the difference between them, Moosh's puppet decided to put down his attitude as the founder of the Master Teacher Academy. Seeing that he had unintentionally dealt a heavy blow to the other party, Zhongxian offered his consolation. There is no need to worry. As long as you work hard, you will surely improve. Yes. The mouth of Moosh's puppet twitched. It had always been the one to say those words to others so as to encourage its juniors. Who could have thought that it would hear those words directed toward it at such an age? But nevertheless, it was indeed true that its intelligence was far beneath the other party. As the saying goes, the proficient becomes the teacher. The other party wasn't really getting ahead of himself to say such words to it. Shaking its head, Moosh's puppet passed the book back. Zhongshe, this Saint Ascension decipher is something you comprehended yourself. I can't cultivate it even if I wanted to, so you should keep it well. Existing only as a puppet now, it could no longer cultivate. As such, the Saint Ascension decipher was useless to it. It's fine. Zhongxian waved his hand. You should keep it. Pass it to the next person who clears the 9th level. The cultivation technique he had deduced was valuable, but it was derived on the foundations of the other party's Saint Ascension decipher and the insights Kongsha had left behind, so it couldn't be exactly called his private possession. In any case, it would serve a greater purpose here. Geniuses who cleared the mountain of records for generations to come would be able to learn the perfected version of the Saint Ascension decipher, thus bolstering the forces of mankind. As for why he chose not to just release it to the world so that everyone could cultivate the technique, it was not that he was unwilling to do so, but he shared the same worries as Kongsha back then. The Saint Ascension decipher was an unparalleled treasure to top-notch geniuses, but to others, it would only grant them false hope before crushing it mercilessly, tearing their confidence and motivation to shreds. This was similar to how 1 billion gold coins might be a small goal to a tycoon, but to ordinary humans, such a goal would only be a source of endless frustration. Yes. After hearing Zhongshen's decision, Moosh's puppet nodded as it bowed deeply. Allow me to thank you in place of the later generations of the Master Teacher Academy. To contribute the cultivation technique he had comprehended unreservedly to others, this was the deed of a true master teacher. Over the past day of interaction, it had learned that the young man was the new principal of the Master Teacher Academy, and it had been shocked for a long while. However, at this moment, it could see why the other party would be nominated to become the principal despite his young age. There was indeed something extraordinary about him. Mushu, there is no need to stand on ceremony. As a master teacher, it is my responsibility to impart knowledge to others and leave behind my heritage to benefit the later generations, Zhongshen replied. Nevertheless, I feel that I should compensate Zhongshe for your generosity. As the new principal, you should be aware of the existence of the Mausoleum of Principles, right? Moosh's puppet asked. Of course. Zhongshen nodded. I took a look earlier, and a breakthrough to half-saint through your Saint Ascension decipher will require a scarlet firefly fruit, which I don't have on me unfortunately. However, I do have the lightning resonance rock required for the breakthrough to nascent saint, and it is currently stored in the Mausoleum of Principles, Moosh's puppet said with a kind smile. Lightning resonance rock? You have it. That's great. Zhongxian's eyes lit up, and he nearly leaped up in excitement. He had already found the scarlet firefly fruit required for a breakthrough to half-saint, so that wasn't a problem. However, the breakthrough to nascent saint required a lightning resonance rock, an extremely rare ore that was only formed after being nurtured by nature's lightning over a course of 10,000 years. The 10 indomitable kings of the Cloud Mist Ridge had gifted him many valuable ores, but there wasn't a single lightning resonance rock in it. This went to show how valuable it was. He was still deliberating how he could obtain it when Musha's puppet suddenly said that it had left one in the Mausoleum of Principles. Indeed, kindness begets kindness. If he hadn't donated the cultivation technique for free, it would have surely taken him a lot of effort in order to procure the lightning resonance rock. I happened to chance upon one while I was roaming the world, but I wasn't able to find a use for it, so I just kept it with me. Musha's puppet nodded. After which, it flicked its wrist, and a unique token appeared in its hand. After you enter the Mausoleum of Principles, head to where my body is buried and flash this token. The treasures I have hidden there should automatically appear. Those are the items I saved up over my entire life for the geniuses of the later generations to inherit. Thank you, Musha. Taking the token, Zhongxian clasped his fist and bowed respectfully. To think of the later generations even as death approached, leaving behind his possessions and heritage for those after him to enjoy, Musha was indeed a true teacher through and through. Since you have cleared the 9th level of the Mountain of Records and received the reward, you may return now. After saying everything it wanted to say, Musha's puppet nodded in satisfaction before waving his hands. It was reassured, knowing that the young man before it would bring the Master Teacher Academy to even greater heights. Farewell. Nodding, Zhongxian clasped his fist and headed down. Returning back to the 8th level, he encountered the worried school head Mo and the others. After reassuring them that he was fine, he headed out of the Mountain of Records with them. When they finally arrived at the bottom, Zhongxian couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. It was fortunate that he had headed there as soon as he became the principal. Otherwise, once he made the breakthrough to half-saint, he would be unqualified to challenge it, and he wouldn't have been able to obtain the Saint Ascension Decipher, thus missing the opportunity to advance his origin core to higher grades. Principal Zhong, where are you intending to go now? The Cultivation Compendium, Zhongxian replied. Cultivation Compendium? The others were taken aback. Yuan. I intend to read through some books and study. Zhongxian nodded. With the Saint Ascension Decipher, he no longer needed the Heaven's Path divine art from Chrysalis Realm to Nascent Saint. Nevertheless, he still wanted to take a look and see if he could perfect it with the books there. If he succeeded, he would be able to make breakthroughs to higher realms even without collecting the required artifacts. I will take you over, School Head Mo said as he took the lead. The Master Teacher Academy's Cultivation Compendium was located near the Elder Hall, and it didn't take long for the both of them to arrive there. The Cultivation Compendium was very unlike the other buildings in the Master Teacher Academy. Despite its majestic scale, it had a rather old and traditional architecture. There was a soothing atmosphere around it that whisked away the anxiety within one. Knowing that Principal Zhong was just going to study, School Head Zhao and the others didn't tag along. Principal Zhong, this is the Cultivation Compendium. There is a total of 5 floors here. The bottommost floor is open to students with outstanding contribution. The second floor is open to teachers. The third floor is open to elders of the academy. The fourth floor is open only to the principal of each generation. And as for the fifth floor, other principals might be unable to enter, but you should have no problem doing so. School Head Mo smiled. Given that Zhongxian had received supreme jurisdiction and the impeccable principal's seal, there was not an inch of ground within the Master Teacher Academy that he couldn't step on. Yuan Zhongxian nodded as he shot the huge building another gaze. After which, he pushed open the door and stepped in. After 2 months. Here I finally am, Cultivation Compendium. Chapter 916, Chrysalis Realm Pinnacle. Each library in the Master Teacher Academy had its own genre. For example, the library in the Beast Tamer School would have books regarding beast taming, and the books in the Physician School's library would be on the way of medicine. Stored in the cultivation compendium were the cultivation and battle technique manuals, as well as the history, geography, culture, and other common knowledge regarding Hongyuan Empire and its surrounding nations. Even though the books on the first floor were open for students to browse through, its collection was still extremely impressive. Millions of cultivation technique manuals spanning from consonant spirit realm to chrysalis realm filled the many tall shelves within the room. It had been 10,000 years since the Master Teacher Academy was established, and many outstanding master teachers had risen throughout the generations. These men had recorded their insights and experiences regarding cultivation so that later generations would be able to analyze them and perhaps surpass them. Some had even created their own techniques and spread them far and wide in the world. This had given rise to a huge assortment of books for each cultivation realm. With just a casual look, Zhong Xian could already find nearly 10,000 different ways one could cultivate the consonant spirit realm from the books. Each of them formed its own complete system and heritage. For any other student, faced with so many choices, they would have to narrow down their choices to a specific classification so as to not overload themselves with information. Otherwise, they could dull their judgment over what was right and wrong, and this could lead to their cultivation going berserk. However, Zhong Xian had no such worry. If there was one demand he had of his cultivation technique manuals, it would be quantity. The more of them there were, the better it would be for him. It took Zhong Xian around 2 hours to collect all of the consonant spirit realm cultivation technique manuals into the Library of Heaven's Path. Compile. Zhong Xian willed. A new book materialized before his eyes, and he casually flipped it open. It was another consonant spirit realm Heaven's Path divine art. While the cultivation technique detailed in it did differ slightly from the other one he had compiled earlier, both cultivation techniques eventually converged into the same outcome. After which, Zhong Xian proceeded on to the Cosmos Bridge Realm cultivation technique manuals, and it also took him 2 hours to collect all of them. With those, he formed a new Cosmos Bridge Realm Heaven's Path divine art. It was much more detailed than the one he had compiled earlier, making it significantly simpler and easier to cultivate. Overall, however, both cultivation techniques were essentially the same. It seems there isn't much of a difference between Heaven's Path divine arts of the same cultivation realm, Zhong Xian noted as he continued collecting the other books. Since he wasn't in a rush, it would be good for him to collect all of the books so as to enhance his knowledge. 10 hours later, Zhong Xian had finally finished collecting all of the cultivation and battle technique manuals on the first floor. While these books hadn't raised his cultivation, they allowed him to expand his base of knowledge, granting him some understanding regarding the various schools of cultivation. With this, he was probably more knowledgeable than all of the master teachers in the academy combined. Not only so, he had also managed to form a new Heaven's Path sword art, Heaven's Path spear art, Heaven's Path saber art, and such. As long as he practiced them, he would be able to advance his weapon intent to even higher levels. However, Zhong Xian was in no hurry to cultivate. He chose to head to the second floor instead. Access to the second floor was limited to only teachers and above, and the battle techniques and cultivation techniques stored on the second floor were significantly more profound than those on the first floor. There were also a few half-saint cultivation technique manuals on some of the shelves too. After collecting the books, Zhong Xian proceeded up. The third floor was restricted to only the elders of the Master Teacher Academy. There were nascent saint and saint realm cultivation technique manuals on the shelves, but the overall quantity of books was much less than the first and second floor. After collecting those books and compiling a Heaven's Path technique out of them, Zhong Xian had finally successfully compiled the Heaven's Path divine art from chrysalis realm to nascent saint. In other words, he could advance his cultivation from chrysalis realm primary stage to saint realm primary stage within 6 hours as long as he wished to. Chuckling in satisfaction, Zhong Xian immersed his consciousness into the Library of Heaven's Path, took the half-saint Heaven's Path divine art, and flipped it open. A moment later, a frown was etched on his face. There was no mistake with the cultivation technique, and if he were to cultivate according to it, he would be able to advance through half-saint, nascent saint, and reach saint realm easily. However, if he were to do so, he would only be able to cultivate a third-grade origin core, and even the weakest primary second-grade origin core of the Saint Ascension decipher was immensely stronger than that. Initially, he had still been a little perplexed about why there was such a huge disparity between the Saint Ascension decipher and the other chrysalis realm, half-saint, and nascent Saint Heaven's Path divine arts when such a situation hadn't occurred for the previous realms. However, after a moment of pondering, an answer surfaced in his mind. Within the cultivation technique manuals in the library, there was not a single one regarding the cultivation of a higher-grade origin core. No matter how many normal cultivation technique manuals he gathered, the eventual cultivation technique manual he compiled would only be normal. A fitting analogy would be, no matter how many straw hut construction manuals one studied, one would still be unable to build a royal palace. Even if the contents of both covered the same grounds, advancing one's cultivation to a higher realm, they were still essentially two completely different paths leading to different destinations. Even though the cultivation of the Saint Ascension decipher is much more difficult, there is a chance that I will be able to cultivate a first-grade origin core and become a celestial saint. If I were to cultivate these normal cultivation techniques instead, I would stand no chance at all, Zhongshen thought. Cultivating the Saint Ascension decipher would require artifacts and more spirit stones, so it would be a difficult path to venture into. However, if he were to succeed, he would gain immense power incomparable to if he had chosen otherwise. Since he could only cultivate his origin core once, it was natural he would have to aim for the best. Having made up his mind, Zhongshen didn't rush into cultivating but instead headed up to the next floor. The fourth floor was an area restricted to only the incumbent principal of the Master Teacher Academy. There were no cultivation or battle technique manuals there, but there were books containing the insights of the preceding principals, as well as information concerning the deepest secrets of the academy. Collecting these books into the Library of Heaven's Path, Zhongshen headed up to the final floor. The fifth floor consisted of mainly items left behind by founder Mu Kai. Zhongshen took a quick look around the room, and it seemed like the Saint Ascension decipher manual wasn't among the items. Nevertheless, there were still many valuable cultivation technique manuals in there. Most of the cultivation technique manuals were regarding Saint Realm 1 Dan, but there was still a very small handful of them regarding Saint Realm 2 Dan or even 3 Dan. There were also a couple of them regarding soul and physical body cultivation. It didn't take too long for Zhongshen to collect everything into the Library of Heaven's Path. Alright, I should start cultivating. After everything was compiled, Zhongshen noticed that he had more than a dozen Heaven's Path cultivation techniques and battle techniques in the Library of Heaven's Path. Taking in a deep breath, he searched for a slightly more spacious location in the room and sat down. Since he had already prepared his chrysalis realm cultivation technique and the scarlet firefly fruit required for him to make a breakthrough to half-saint, it was about time for him to raise his cultivation. Taking out a couple of formation flags from his storage ring, he swiftly set up a grade 6 spirit gathering formation in the area before taking out a couple of high-tier spirit stones and placing them in the area. Hong Long. As the spirit gathering formation came to life, spiritual energy was swiftly drawn out from the high-tier spirit stones to form a thick layer of mist in the area. Even without cultivating, the spiritual energy would automatically seep through his skin, nourishing his body. Zhongshen sat down on the floor before opening all of his pores to start absorbing the spiritual energy in the air at a frenzied pace. The spiritual energy contained within high-tier spirit stones was significantly purer and more condensed than the energy contained within the earth vein spirit essence, thus making it ideal for him to use in advancing his cultivation. Closing his eyes, Zhongshen began driving his zhenqi according to the circulation pathway of the Saint Ascension decipher, gathering surge after surge of zhenqi in his dantian and condensing them into strands. The revised Saint Ascension decipher was completely different from before. In the previous version, 7 strands of zhenqi formed a knot, 7 knots formed a bundle, and 7 bundles formed a decipher. However, in the revised version, 9 strands of zhenqi formed a knot, 9 knots formed a bundle, and 9 bundles formed a decipher. Based on his deductions, the form that was most aligned with nature and the heavens was in sets of 9. Goo 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 goo. Spiritual energy swiftly gushed into Zhongshen's body, and he quickly converted it into zhenqi before condensing it and gathering it into knots, bundles, and deciphers. As a technique to cultivate a higher-grade origin core, the Saint Ascension Decipher was far more complex than a normal Heaven's Path divine art, and thus, it was significantly more difficult and laborious to cultivate. If Zhongxian had chosen to cultivate the normal Heaven's Path divine art, he should have been able to raise his cultivation by a realm within 2 hours at most. On the other hand, cultivating the Saint Ascension Decipher, despite having cultivated for 2 hours, he still hadn't even advanced a single stage. It was at this moment that he finally understood why Mu She had ended up spending several hundred years just to cultivate a second-grade advanced origin core. While the Saint Ascension Decipher had the mystical effect of raising the grade of one's origin core, granting one strength far beyond their peers, its demand was simply so huge that it was nearly an endless abyss. Putting everything aside, even with Zhongxian's cultivation speed and the aid of a grade 6 spirit gathering formation, it would still take him at least an entire day before he could reach Chrysalis Realm Pinnacle. For what should have taken 2 hours to stretch out to an entire day, from this, the enhanced difficulty in the cultivation of the Saint Ascension Decipher was apparent. In any case, Zhongxian was in no rush anyway. If a day was what it took, so be it. According to the notes Mu She had left behind on the Saint Ascension Decipher, it had taken him more than 200 years to come to this point. Seated motionlessly on the ground, Zhongxian patiently drove his zhenqi, and his cultivation gradually rose. Chrysalis Realm Primary Stage, Chrysalis Realm Intermediate Stage, Chrysalis Realm Advanced Stage. A day later, Zhongxian finally reached Chrysalis Realm Pinnacle. In his current state, he was only a step away from making a breakthrough to half-saint. My strength has grown tremendously. Halting his cultivation, Zhongxian took an inward look at his physical state, and he couldn't help but remark in awe. For an ordinary Chrysalis Realm cultivator, the rise in strength at each cultivation stage was 3 million ding. However, having cultivated the Saint Ascension Decipher, Zhongxian's rise in strength per stage was 6 million ding. Ordinary Chrysalis Realm, primary stage 25 million ding, intermediate stage 28 million ding, advanced stage 31 million ding, pinnacle 34 million ding. The strength derived from his zhenqi cultivation had been 29 million ding initially, but after reaching Chrysalis Realm Pinnacle, it had increased by 18 million ding to 47 million ding. If the 20 million ding and 32 million ding from his soul cultivation and physical body cultivation were taken into account as well, his strength would be 99 million ding, just a bit short of matching the 100 million ding strength that Saint Realm cultivators wield. In other words, in terms of strength, he was nearly on par with Saint Realm experts. Scary. For a Chrysalis Realm Pinnacle cultivator to be comparable to a Saint Realm cultivator in terms of pure strength, would anyone in the Master-Teacher continent believe his words if he were to tell them about this? But while Zhongxian did wield strength comparable to a Saint Realm cultivator, he would still be in a disadvantageous position in a fight against a real Saint Realm cultivator. The superior strength of saints wasn't derived merely from the boost in their strength but their enhanced comprehension of the laws of the world as well. For one, Saint Realm cultivators were capable of dealing long-range attacks with minimal dissipation in might. On the other hand, if Zhongxian wanted to utilize the strength of his physical body and soul cultivation as well, he needed to be in close quarters with his opponent. Without those two to augment his attacks, his might would only be at 47 million ding, comparable to only a half-saint advanced stage cultivator. Nevertheless, his current fighting prowess was still extremely frightening. Even Principal Mo Liuzhen wouldn't have been a match for him at all. After relishing in his newfound power, Zhongxian couldn't help but look at the dust remnants on the ground with a bitter smile. My fighting prowess did grow by a lot, but the consumption of high-tier spirit stones is truly. The Saint Ascension Decipher could indeed further reinforce the foundation of his cultivation and enhance the richness of his zhenqi, granting him superior might. However, this came at a heavy price. For one, just the consumption of high-tier spirit stones was sufficient to leave him frenzied. He had received a few hundred high-tier spirit stones from Wu Shu and Lu Cheng back then, and adding in the ones he had procured from the Golden Bear Tiger Beast storage ring and the congratulatory gifts from the Cloud Mist Ridge for his inauguration ceremony, he had possessed a total of around 800 spirit stones, making him richer than any of the 10 great master teachers in the academy. Yet, just to advance from Chrysalis Realm primary stage to pinnacle, He had consumed 500 of them. That was more than half of his wealth. He could almost see a life of poverty waiting right ahead of him. Chapter 9:17. Another breakthrough, half-saint reach. Zhongxian sighed deeply before muttering beneath his breath. Forget it, I will just have to find a way to deal with it when the time comes. For the time being, it is more important for me to raise my cultivation. He was only a step away from reaching half-saint, and he happened to have the scarlet firefly fruit required for his breakthrough as well. Since that was the case, there was no need for him to hesitate. Conditioning his state back to its peak, he took a deep breath before reluctantly tossing his remaining 300 high-tier spirit stones into the spirit-gathering formation. Hoo. As soon as the high-tier spirit stones came into contact with the formation, the concentration of spiritual energy in the area swiftly rose to the point that it felt almost tangible. Following which, Zhongxian took out a scarlet firefly fruit and swallowed it. Back in the valley, he had procured a total of 10 of them. Hu Yarrow and the others had taken 4 of them, and having achieved a breakthrough each, they had not required any more. Thus, the remaining 6 had gone into his storage ring. As soon as the scarlet firefly fruit entered his mouth, it melted into an immense surge of energy, which gushed through his body. In just a short moment, he could vaguely feel an impetus, driving him to a breakthrough. However, the impetus wasn't very strong. Zhongxian knew that with the current momentum he had, there was a high chance that he would fail in his breakthrough. Thus, he took out another scarlet firefly fruit and consumed it. It took a total of 4 fruits before Zhongxian was finally satisfied. Feeling the immense power coursing through his meridians, he took a deep breath and absorbed the surrounding spiritual energy into his body. Hong long. A crisp echo sounded in the room, as if the shackles that had been trapping Zhongxian's body had been broken. At the same time, it also seemed as if a door leading to a new world had opened before his eyes. All of his pores opened simultaneously, drawing the surrounding spiritual energy furiously into him, driving the evolution of his body and soul toward that of a higher being. Half-saint, reached. At half-saint, one was still a considerable distance away from achieving sainthood, but nevertheless, one would no longer be considered to be on the same level of existence as a transcendent mortal. Be it one's physical body or soul, they had both undergone a qualitative evolution to become far stronger and more resilient than before, thus lengthening one's lifespan significantly as well. The limit of an average transcendent mortal's lifespan was 200, whereas a half-saint could easily live to 500. That was more than a 2-fold increase in one's lifespan. Other than that, Zhongxian's strength had also increased significantly. From the initial 47 million ding, it had risen by 13 million ding to 60 million ding. Just in terms of the strength he could draw from his zhenqi cultivation, he was already on par with a nascent saint primary stage cultivator. Paired with his physical body and soul cultivation, he would be able to easily kill any Saint Realm 1 Dan expert at close range. Other than the rise in his strength, his reaction speed and reflexes had also grown immensely. If he were to face Moosh as puppet once again in battle, he would surely be able to defeat the other party easily. It is great that my fighting prowess has grown so much, but I am back to my broke days once more. Zhongxian lamented. The items he had received in the inauguration ceremony a few days ago had left him greatly excited, and he had thought that he could finally be considered a tycoon. As such, he had haughtily turned down the gifts from many, thinking that he should uphold his standing. Yet, a single round of cultivation had undone everything. This darned cultivation. It sure was like an endless abyss, dragging him back to square one each time he thought he had struck it rich. He knew that the cultivating the Saint Ascension Decipher would surely require a lot of zhenqi, and the fact that he cultivated the Heaven's Path divine art only served to nudge the requirement even higher. A couple of high-tier spirit stones could easily help others raise their cultivation up several stages, but to him, it was as if throwing pebbles into a pond, raising just a momentary ripple and nothing else. Going by even my most conservative estimates, advancing to Saint Realm will cost me at least 5,000 high-tier spirit stones. Zhongxian thought with twitching lips. He had been thinking of advancing straight to Saint Realm in a single breath after the inauguration ceremony, but that was clearly impossible now. advancing from Chrysalis Realm Primary Stage to Half-Saint Primary Stage, despite using the energy contained within 4 Scarlet Firefly fruits, had still depleted 800 high-tier spirit stones. The numbers would only rise for his breakthrough to Nascent Saint and eventually Saint Realm. At this rate, 5,000 would be a truly positive estimate. But the problem was that even if he were to overturn the entire Master Teacher Academy, he would still be unable to gather that many high-tier spirit stones. Rubbing his glabella, Zhongxian thought in frustration, "It seems like I will have to head out and find a way to earn some money." Really, what was with this? When others cultivated, what they would be frustrated by was their bottleneck. But instead of worrying over that, his problem had always been being poor. Was this what they meant when they said that being poor limits one's imagination? If it really comes down to it, I will just have to sell the congratulatory gifts from the Cloud Mist Ridge. That should tide me over for a while. The gifts his tamed beasts from the Cloud Mist Ridge had given him were indeed very valuable, and if he were to sell them, he would be able to earn 2,000 to 3,000 high-tier spirit stones easily. However, there were simply too few people in Hongyuan City who could afford to buy anything from him. Not even the royal family had that much money. If he couldn't find ample spirit stones, he wouldn't be able to advance his cultivation despite possessing the complete Saint Ascension decipher. I almost forgot. Are the pavilion masters from the Master Teacher Pavilion of the surrounding empires still around? Perhaps I might be able to sell my goods to them. Back when School Head Mo was briefing him about the inauguration ceremony, he had also done a brief introduction on the 4 nearby Tier 1 empires, Hongkai, Yuanjiang, Baituo, and Kaiyao. The national strengths of these 4 empires were comparable to Hongyuan Empire, perhaps exceeding it even. If he could sell his goods to them, he should be able to earn quite a number of high-tier spirit stones to tide him over. Zhongxian stroked his lower jaw contemplatively before rising to his feet and heading out of the cultivation compendium. I think this is a plausible idea. However, for the time being, I should first get the Lightning Resonance Stone in the Mausoleum of Principles. The Lightning Resonance Stone was the artifact he required as a catalyst for his breakthrough from Half-Saint to Nascent Saint. Already at Half-Saint, as long as he could gather sufficient high-tier spirit stones, it wouldn't be too long before he needed it to make a breakthrough. Thus, it would be best for him to take it and keep it on him. After leaving the cultivation compendium, Zhongxian went to look for School Head Mo, and just as he was about to speak, the latter suddenly looked at him excitedly and said, "Principal Zhong, congratulations." Bewildered, Zhongxian shot the other party a questioning gaze. "Weren't you trying to purchase the blood essence of a Saint Realm Myriad Ant Hive Queen earlier? I sent in the application to the Beast Hall headquarters a while ago, and they approved the request. Just this morning, the Saint Realm Myriad Ant Hive Queen's blood essence arrived at our Master Teacher Academy," School Head Mo said excitedly. "Oh yes, your 7-star Beast Tamer emblem also arrived together with it," after which, School Head Mo quickly passed over a jade bottle and an emblem. Zhongxian took those 2 items from School Head Mo's hands and studied the jade bottle with a perplexed expression before turning his gaze back to the latter. He asked, "Didn't you say that the Myriad Ant Hive Queen's blood essence would be expensive? Why would?" The cultivation of his Myriad Ant Hive Queen was currently too low, rendering it incapable of continuing the expansion the Myriad Ant Hive nest unless its cultivation was raised one way or another. Thus, a few days earlier, Zhongxian had paid School Head Mo a visit to inquire about the purchase of a Saint Realm Myriad Ant Hive Queen's blood essence. However, the answer he had received was that it would cost at least several thousand high-tier spirit stones. Until now, Zhongxian had yet to gather so many high-tier spirit stones, so why would the headquarters deliver the blood essence all of a sudden? It is indeed expensive, but Principal Zhong, you tamed all of the spirit beasts and saint beasts on the Cloud Mist Ridge, and that is a huge contribution. Thus, the Beast Tamer Hall headquarters decided to gift this bottle of Myriad Ant Hive Queen's blood essence to you directly as a reward. School Head Mo explained with a smile. On top of that, they have also expressed their interest in inviting you to the Qingyuan Empire Beast Hall to impart your technique for taming spirit beasts swiftly. Not expecting for there to be such a benefit from taming the beasts of the Cloud Mist Ridge, Zhongxian nodded in delight. I see. Help me relay my thanks to the headquarters of the Beast Hall. I will definitely head there if I have an opportunity to do so in the future. As he uncorked the jade bottle, the scent of the blood essence within immediately permeated the air. Within the bottle, he could feel an immense energy being harnessed within the fluid. After a quick glance, Zhongxian couldn't help but widen his eyes in shock. Isn't this the blood essence of a Saint Realm 4 Dan Myriad Ant-Hive Queen? When he made the request, he had expected the blood essence to be from a Saint Realm 1 Dan or 2 Dan Myriad Ant-Hive Queen. Never in his dreams had he thought that it would be from a Saint Realm 4 Dan Myriad Ant-Hive Queen. It was already incredibly difficult to find a single one of the elusive Myriad Ant-Hive Queens, needless to say a Saint Realm 4 Dan one. This was an unimaginably valuable commodity that was nearly impossible to find on the market. Yet, the other party had actually given so much of it at once. If he really had to pay for it, there was no way he would have been able to afford it. With this, the strength of the Myriad Ant-Hive Queen would soar, and it wouldn't be long before it achieved a breakthrough to Saint Realm. Flicking his wrist, Zhongxian placed the jade bottle into the Myriad Ant-Hive nest for the Myriad Ant-Hive Queen to consume before turning his gaze to the 7-star Beast Tamer emblem. The design was identical to that of the 4-star emblem he had, just that the 4 stars had been replaced with 7 stars instead. However, one thing noteworthy was that the material of the emblem had changed. It felt a little heavier and solemn, seemingly reflecting the noble standing of the one who possessed it. Even though he was a 7-star demonic tunist as well, ultimately, demonic tunist was only considered a lower 9 paths occupation. It could hardly compare with the prestigious upper 9 paths occupations. Even if Zhongxian didn't have his identity as the principal of the Master Teacher Academy, just by this 7-star Beast Tamer emblem in itself, there was no one who would dare underestimate or disrespect him, regardless of where he went. Thank you, School Head Mo. Knowing that the other party must have done quite a bit of work to apply for this emblem for him, Zhongxian clasped his fist in gratitude. There is no need for that. School Head Mo shook his head with a smile before gazing at Zhongxian intently. Speaking of which, when do you intend to take the 6-star Master Teacher examination? I will have to make preparations in advance. You should start making preparations then. I intend to take it as soon as possible. But before that, I would like to make a trip to the Mausoleum of Principles, Zhongxian said. Mausoleum of Principles? School Head Mo was surprised for a moment before shaking his head. I'm afraid that you might not have the authority to enter it at the moment. Why? Zhongxian frowned, perplexed by School Head Mo's words. He had obtained the Supreme Jurisdiction and Impeccable Principles seal. Was there anywhere in the Master Teacher Academy that he was still restricted from entering? Fearing that Zhongxian would misunderstand, School Head Mo swiftly explained the matter. You are indeed able to go anywhere you wish in the Master Teacher Academy, having received everyone's approval in the inauguration ceremony, but, to enter the Mausoleum of Principles, you will have to sever a portion of your soul and leave it on the Mausoleum tablet. In other words, you have to leave a will behind as well. The severing of the soul inflicts considerable damage to one's soul, so why don't you challenge the 6-star Master Teacher examination first? Meanwhile, using your contribution, I can help you apply for an artifact for severing your soul from the Master Teacher Pavilion headquarters. This way, the damage to your soul will be minimized. Taming the spirit beasts and saint beasts of the Cloud Mist Ridge was as huge a contribution to the Master Teacher Pavilion as it was to the Beast Hall. Through the contribution, Zhongxian could easily apply for a powerful artifact to aid in the matter. Hearing those words, Zhongxian nodded. Given that the preceding principals of the Master Teacher Academy had appeared in the inauguration ceremony, it would mean that they had also severed their souls and left behind their will when they were alive. Having severed his soul once in the past, he knew that it was a process that was highly damaging, even for soul oracles, who specialized in souls. It would take a long period of recuperation before one could recover from the trauma. However, Zhongxian had the soul of the blue-horn dragon beast in his possession, which he could use to quicken the recovery of his soul. However, if he were to do so, he would risk exposing his identity as a soul oracle, which could pose to be a great trouble. After a moment of hesitation, Zhongxian nodded. I see. I will take the 6-star Master Teacher examination first then. It was one thing if he was just a normal master teacher, but as the new principal of the Hongyuan master teacher, his identity as a soul oracle could not be revealed by any means. In any case, it was not like anyone else could get to the lightning resonance stone before him, so taking the 6-star master teacher examination first wasn't a problem. All right. School head Mo nodded. At that moment, an elder suddenly rushed into the room, and upon seeing the both of them, he clasped his fist and reported, "Principal Zhong, Emperor Yu Shenqing wishes to meet you. He has been waiting outside for some time now." Chapter 918, Body Seed Yu Shenqing? Zhong Xian frowned. Why was the other party looking for him? School head Mo pondered for a moment before explaining with a smile. "Principal Zhong, after you rejected his gift, he has been coming over whenever he's had time these past few days, requesting to meet you. No matter how we tried, we weren't able to stop him. My guess is that he probably fears that he has gotten on your bad side unwittingly." Principal Zhong had caused a huge ruckus during the inauguration ceremony, be it the congratulations from the thousands of beasts, the public lecture that had made him a half-teacher to almost everyone in the academy, or winning the recognition of every single person at the inauguration ceremony. Just from these feats, it was apparent to anyone who had been at the inauguration ceremony that Principal Zhong would become an extremely powerful person in the future. As such, many powers had sent valuable gifts in the hope of winning his favor. Yu Shenqing had also done the same as well, but who would have thought that the other party would turn down his goodwill? He couldn't help but recall how he had chased the other party out during his daughter's birthday, and shivers ran down his spine. With such a history, there was no way Yu Shenqing could remain idle. "Let's go and take a look." Understanding the logic behind this matter, Zhong Xian nodded and made his way over. The reason he didn't accept the other party's gift was because he didn't feel that it was right to be taking advantage of the other party. After all, despite what he had done for the other party, he had taken a peek at the other party's soul cultivation techniques and made use of their body saintry, so he considered the both of them equal. But if his act had left the other party misunderstanding his intention, that would truly be horrible. Soon, they arrived at the reception hall where the principal usually hosted his guests and saw Yu Shenqing seated with an anxious expression. Accompanying Yu Shenqing were 3 middle-aged men, and 2 of them, for some reason, dared not sit down and were standing at the back with pale faces. Zhong Xian didn't recognize the 2 middle-aged men standing behind, but the person sitting next to Yu Shenqing was a familiar face. It was the man who had gifted him his manor, King Huai. "Your Majesty, King Huai." Even though it was out of consideration of his ties with Yuan Dao, it was a fact that the other party had done him a huge favor while he was still in a humble position, so he had quite a favorable impression of the other party. Paying respects to Principal Zhong, the 4 of them got their feet and clasped their fists. The 4 of them represented the pinnacle of authority within Hongyuan Empire, but nevertheless, their standing was still beneath that of the principal of the Master Teacher Academy. There is no need to stand on ceremony. Zhong Xian waved his hand before making his way over to the main seat. After which, he turned to King Huai and asked, "Your Highness, I should have paid you a visit long ago to thank you for your generous gift. For you to have come here instead, I am truly embarrassed." "Principal Zhong, there is no need for that." King Huai hurriedly bowed politely. "When I first met you, I already knew that you are a capable person who is bound for great things. But nevertheless, I didn't expect you to become the principal of the Master Teacher Academy so quickly," King Huai remarked meaningfully. When he first met Zhongshe, he hadn't thought much of the other party. It was only due to the latter's relationship to Yuan Dao, a member of a sage clan, that he thought of striking up a close relationship with the latter. But who could have known that, in a short span of less than 2 months, a seemingly insignificant consonant spirit realm figure who had no backing or connections in Hongyuan City would rise to become the most powerful person in the Master Teacher Academy? It was truly inconceivable that things would develop in such a manner. "Your Highness, you are too polite," Zhong Xian replied with a smile. "If you don't mind, why don't you show me a move or two?" "Show you a move or two?" King Huai was stunned for a moment before ecstasy crept across his face. To be saying such words, it could only mean that the other party was intending to offer him some pointers. While the other party's cultivation was currently still beneath him, Considering how the other party could even enlighten donkeys and roosters through his lecture, his teaching was surely something that no ordinary 6-star master teachers could compare to. If he could receive the pointers of a person like that, he would surely be spared from many years of fumbling around. It will be my pleasure, King Huai replied excitedly. He quickly walked over the center of the reception hall and began executing a battle technique. As soon as he made his move, his cultivation became apparent. Just like school head Mo and the others, he was at Saint Realm Wundan Pinnacle as well. It didn't take too long for him to finish executing his battle technique. He swiftly returned back to his position, standing upright as if a student before his teacher. A moment later, he heard the impassive voice of the young man ahead of him. Your Highness, your mastery of the fleeting water fist art is indeed impressive. However, have you been suffering from poor blood circulation recently and occasional bouts of weakness? This. How do you know? King Huai was astonished, and his body stiffened slightly. He had indeed been suffering from poor blood circulation recently, and his zhenqi hadn't been flowing as smoothly as before. However, he had made sure to conceal the news well, not telling anyone at all. As such, even Yu Shenqing was oblivious to his ailment. After all, given the prestigious position he was in, there were many who desired to take his place. If it was made known that his physical condition wasn't in the best of states, it might just stoke some of the more ambitious individuals into action, thus bringing unnecessary trouble to him. Yet, for the other party to notice the issue from a single battle technique, just how formidable was his eye of discernment. On the other hand, instead of replying, Zhongxian continued speaking with a smile. If I am not mistaken, it is caused by an injury you suffered in the past, right? The reason King Huai was able to hold such an esteemed position was due to the many contributions he had achieved for the country on the battlefield when he was younger. However, in the midst of doing so, there were several occasions when he sustained severe injuries that threatened to claim his life. The trauma was probably left from back then. That's right, King Huai replied with a nod. I have a gourd of fine wine here. Drink it and circulate your zhenqi according to the cultivation technique I am about to impart to you, then your trauma will be resolved. Work hard, and you might just be able to achieve a breakthrough in your cultivation. Chuckling softly, Zhongxian flicked his wrist and handed a gourd over to King Huai. After which, he took out a piece of paper and a brush and swiftly wrote down a cultivation technique. Even though his cultivation was only at half-saint primary stage, he had read through all of the books within the Master Teacher Academy's cultivation compendium, which had granted him a deep understanding of the Saint Wundan and Saint Tudan realms. As such, it was a walk in the park for him to come up with a cultivation technique aligned with the other party's constitution. Thank you, Principal Zhong, King Huai said before taking a look at the cultivation technique he had just received. With just a look, his eyes narrowed, and his body began trembling non-stop. Given his eye of discernment, he could easily tell that this cultivation technique was far more advanced than the royal family's cultivation technique, which he was currently practicing. On top of that, it was aligned with his constitution. If he were to cultivate it seriously, not only would he be able to resolve his trauma, there was a very high chance that he could overcome his current bottleneck and reach higher realms. He had only given the other party a manner, but in exchange, he had received a cultivation technique that he could pass on to his offspring and descendants. He had truly struck it rich. This. Yu Shenqing and the other two glanced at one another and shook their heads. They didn't know what was written in the cultivation technique, but for the usually composed King Huai to get so agitated, that could only mean that it was extraordinary. If only they'd also had the foresight to get close to Zhongshe before he became the principal. To do so now, it was already too late. There is no need to stand on ceremony, Zhongxian replied with a smile. It was just a normal cultivation technique, not a simplified version of the Heaven's Path divine art. It wasn't anything much at all. This served as his compensation to the other party for gifting him the manner, so they could be considered equal now. After dealing with King Huai's matter, Zhongxian turned his gaze to Yu Shenqing and asked, Your Majesty, may I know the reason behind your visit? Yu Shenqing hurriedly got to his feet and replied, Principal Zhong, there are 2 reasons behind my arrival. Oh, you are the benefactor of our Yu clan. Not only did you impart my daughter a set of soul cultivation techniques, you even treated the body saint tree. I am truly grateful to you. It would be truly unbecoming of me if I didn't repay the favor. Yu Shenqing hurriedly spoke up. The other party's refusal of his gift had left him jittery, so he had decided to pay the other party a visit to hand it over personally. You are too polite, Zhongxian replied courteously. I know that Principal Zhong is not a person who is interested in material gains. This is the only body seed that the body saint tree has borne over all these years. I hope that you can accept this gift. Yu Shenqing flicked his wrist and presented a jade box. He opened the box, revealing a round seed within. Body seed. Zhongxian frowned questioningly. What was this thing used for? Despite the many books that Zhongxian had read, there didn't seem to be anything regarding body seeds. As long as you plant and nurture it well, it will grow into another body saint tree. Cultivating under the tree can help to calm one's mind, thus enhancing one's rate of cultivation while decreasing the chances of one's cultivation going berserk. On top of that, it has mystical effects for those who cultivate the soul, Yu Shenqing quickly explained. It can be used to grow a body saint tree? Zhongxian's eyes lit up. He was rather interested in the body saint tree after seeing its prowess in nourishing Wei Ruyan's soul quickly. If he could obtain one and cultivate his soul within it, his soul cultivation would surely rise swiftly as well. Yu Shenqing nodded as he passed it over. Since Principal Zhong was able to create such a formidable set of soul cultivation techniques, you must have a deep understanding of souls as well. I believe that this should be useful to you, so please do accept it. Zhongxian took the box and nodded. Thank you for your gift. He would have probably turned it down if it was anything else, but it just so happened that he had a use for the body seed. He could plant it within the myriad anthive nest and bring it around with him so that his soul could cultivate in it whenever he had the time to do so. On the other hand, seeing Zhongxian accept his gift, Yu Shenqing heaved a long sigh of relief. After which, he gestured to the two middle-aged men behind him and said, As for the second matter, I will leave it to you two to speak about. The two middle-aged men hurriedly stepped forward and clasped their fists. The incumbent head of Hongyuan City's Shen clan, Shen Wanting, pays respect to Principal Zhong. The incumbent head of Hongyuan City's Liu clan, Liu Ziyan, pays respect to Principal Zhong. Shen clan, Liu clan. Zhongxian had heard of the four great clans of Hongyuan City, but he had never had any interactions with them. Why would these two clan heads abruptly pay him a visit? Yes. My unfilial son must have been blind to have offended Principal Zhong, so I have come as the representative of the entire Shen clan to apologize for his deeds. My son, Liu Quan, was brazen to have crossed you, so I have come here to seek your forgiveness. I will leave that unfilial son of mine for you to deal with. The two clan heads raised their hands, and two young men were pressed forward. They were Shen Jun and Liu Quan, whom Zhongxian had met back at Yu Fei's birthday banquet. At that moment, neither of them possessed the dashing appearance they had during the birthday banquet. Their faces were pummeled to the point that they had swollen up like a pig's face. Had it not been for the two clan heads introducing themselves, he would have never made the connection between the two. There was only one word that could describe the current state they were in: miserable. This. Zhongxian blinked his eyes in confusion. Even though he had gotten into a verbal disagreement with Shen Jun back at Yu Fei's birthday banquet, there wasn't any significant conflict between them. There was no need to have gone that far. These two fellows actually dared to cause Principal Zhong trouble. It's our lack of discipline that has resulted in this situation, so we wish to compensate you for this matter. We ask of you to accept it. Raising his hand, Shen Wanting proffered a storage ring with an earnest attitude. This. Zhongxian was at a loss. Did these two fellows cause him trouble? Why didn't he have any recollection of the matter? Did he suffer an amnesia at some point? Noting Principal Zhong's silence, Liu Ziyan continued pleading anxiously. Principal Zhong, I hope that you can accept our goodwill. Otherwise, I fear that our clans will dare not remain in Hongyuan City. Zhongxian became even more bewildered. Just what was happening? On the other hand, seeing the earnest confusion on Principal Zhong's face, Yu Shenqing and King Huai glanced at one another and admiration filled their minds. Two men had tried to cause him trouble by sending men to pummel him, but he actually didn't remember the matter at all. As expected of the principal, such trivial matters wouldn't even faze him in the slightest. Incredible. Chapter 919. Shen Jun burst into tears, returning back to the time right after the end of the inauguration ceremony. After watching such a thrilling inauguration ceremony, Shen Wanting and Liu Ziyan were filled with agitation and awe. This was especially so for Shen Wanting. As the man who wielded absolute power over the largest clan in Hongyuan City, he had a clear idea of the significance of the commotion that had occurred today. To become the master of every single beast of the Cloud Mist Ridge, and to be recognized by every single master teacher in the Master Teacher Academy, the authority the other party wielded could be said to be unmatched in Hongyuan City. Even Emperor Yu Shenqing couldn't even come close to measuring up to the power the other party wielded. If the Shen clan could get on good terms with the other party, it would surely rise through the ranks and prosper for many generations to come. Thus, he was intending to rush back to the clan to discuss with the other elders and come up with a plan to forging a close relationship with Principal Zhong, but at that very moment, his prided son was suddenly brought to him on a stretcher, severely wounded. What happened? Shen Wanting's face darkened in fury. As the head of the four great clans, the Shen clan wielded immense power in Hongyuan City. For his son, the young successor to the clan, to be pummeled like that in broad daylight, the culprit sure was brazen. Did the name of the Shen clan mean nothing to him? Father, you must redress my grievance. Upon seeing Shen Wanting, Shen Jun howled in agony with tears and snot flowing down his face. Regardless of who the culprit is, to dare provoke our Shen clan, I will make sure that he pays for his action dearly, even if he is a noble or a relative of the royal family. With eyes narrowed in rage, Shen Wanting made his declaration majestically with unquestionable authority. As the head of the number one clan in Hongyuan City, he did have the right to say such words. The culprit is an obscure master teacher of the Master Teacher Academy. That despicable bastard colluded with his comrades to lure me and Liu Quan into a trap, surrounding us and pummeling us viciously. Shen Jun clenched his jaw. He knew that there were many people involved in the attack, but as his head was covered in a gunny sack throughout the entire incident, he wasn't clear how many had participated. Of the entire attack, he only recalled endless blows raining down upon him before fainting. And when he came to once more, he was already in his current state. An obscure master teacher, surrounding you and pummeling you viciously? Shen Wanting's eyebrows shot up. He must be tired of living to be so brazen as to provoke our Shen clan. The Shen clan was a behemoth with influence across almost every single trade in Hongyuan City. In fact, even the Master Teacher Pavilion had 7 6-star master teachers who were allied with them. There were also a couple of clan members who were 6-star master teachers as well. As such, if the enemy was just an ordinary master teacher, the Shen clan would still be able to deal with the other party easily. Regardless of whether it was the Master Teacher Pavilion or the Master Teacher Academy, they would still at least give this small privilege to the Shen clan. What rank is he? Even though Shen Jun had said that the other party was an obscure master teacher, Shen Wanting still felt that it was better to be safe. 4-star. Shen Jun hurriedly replied. A mere 4-star master teacher, with his father making a move personally, it would only take moments before that despicable bastard was destroyed. A fellow of that level actually dared bully you? Shen Wanting narrowed his eyes in rage as he flung his sleeves furiously. What is his name? I will send our men to apprehend him this instant. The name of that despicable bastard is Zhong Xian, Shen Jun replied with his fists clenched in excitement. With this, that fellow was a goner. However, after hearing that name, Shen Wanting seemed to have frozen on the spot, and his face paled. Noticing the bizarre silence lingering in the room, as well as the peculiar state his father was in, Shen Jun couldn't help but ask, "Father, what is wrong?" But before he could finish his words, Shen Wanting's feet suddenly flew right toward his chest as he bellowed furiously, "To hell with you. If you want to die, go ahead. Don't drag the Shen clan down with you." Peng. Not expecting that his father would suddenly make a move on him, Shen Jun was unprepared for the kick and was sent crashing right into the wall. Huge spurts of blood gushed out of his mouth, and he nearly died on the spot. The situation was baffling to him. "Father, I am the one who was pummeled. It is one thing if you aren't willing to get even with the other party for my sake, but to be chastising me and even kicking me because of the matter. Furthermore, to hell with me. I am your son." Clenching his jaws, Shen Jun said indignantly, "Father, if you don't intend to help me, I can settle the matter myself. As the eldest son of the Shun clan, I still have the ability to deal with a 4-star master teacher easily. No matter what, he was a person who had greatly contributed to Hongyuan Empire, a meritorious subject of the royal court. It was already a blessing for someone of his standing not to bully others, but to think that someone would dare bully him instead. If he was really pushed to a corner, he could even pull his connections within the military to get the job done. After all, given his backing, there were plenty who would be eager to fawn over him. All it took to teach a 4-star master teacher a lesson was just a word from him. "You aren't going to give up? Do you really want me to chop off your hands?" Hearing the words of his unfilial son, Shen Wanting nearly spurted blood. He hurriedly waved his hands and said, "Men, bind this fellow up and pummel him. I will punish anyone who dares hold back on him." Hearing the command, the subordinates in the room glanced at one another, bewildered by the abrupt command. However, they dared not defy a direct command from the clan head. They hurried forward to tie Shen Jun now, but they didn't make a move immediately. Instead, they turned to Shen Wanting to seek his confirmation on the matter. Seeing that his father was serious about this matter, Shen Jun uttered in disbelief, "Why? You are asking me why? Do you know who the new principal of the Master Teacher Academy is?" Shen Wanting roared as his hands trembled in overwhelming rage. "Principal? I was pummeled shortly after entering the academy, so I didn't attend the inauguration ceremony," Shen Jun said awkwardly. Even though his father had taken him to the inauguration ceremony so as to broaden his horizons, he had been beaten up before the ceremony began, so he had no choice but to have his subordinates carry him back to the clan. As such, he had no idea what had happened at the inauguration ceremony, and he didn't have the slightest clue who the new principal was either. "The new principal is the 4-star master teacher you spoke of, Zhong Xian," Shen Wanting howled furiously before turning to the subordinates and gesturing majestically. "After pummeling him, carry this unfilial son to the Master Teacher Academy to apologize. Wait, no, he will follow me to the royal palace later on. I have to meet Emperor Shen Yuqing first." Given the atrocious crime his unfilial son had committed, he probably would not even be granted entry if he just went over to apologize. Thus, he could only ask Shen Yuqing for a favor. A similar scene also played out in the Liu clan. The bewildered Liu Quan was viciously lashed by his father, and more importantly, the latter even prohibited him from applying medicine to his wounds. As such, many of his open wounds ended up being infected, causing him great agony. At the same time, his state also became so horrifying that no one was willing to allow their gaze to linger on his body more than an instant. If Liu Quan and Shen Jun were still indignant at how their fathers had treated him a moment earlier, after seeing Zhong Xian naturally take the main seat in the room, drive King Huai into tears of gratefulness with just a few words, and Emperor Yu Shenqing begging him to accept the body seed. With their wits, how could they possibly still remain oblivious to the standing of the young man before them? The heavily wounded Shen Jun lowered his head and pleaded, "I will take responsibility for my own actions. I was the one who was insolent to Principal Zhong, so I beseech you to not implicate our Shen clan in this matter. I was the one who gathered those men. This has nothing to do with the Liu clan at all. My father was completely oblivious to my actions," Liu Quan quickly added. After hearing those words, Zhong Xian finally got a rough idea as to what had happened, and he couldn't help but shake his head. "To march into the Master Teacher Academy, declaring that you wish to teach me a lesson publicly. Aren't you just asking for trouble? Even if you weren't aware that I am the principal, the strength and scale of the Shenxian faction was there for all to see. You should be counting your blessings that you weren't mobbed to death." Even though Shen Jun and Liu Quan had meant him harm, they had already gotten what they deserved. In any case, he wasn't injured in the matter either. As such, Zhong Xian was intending to turn down the compensation, But a thought that suddenly flashed across his mind prompted him to accept the storage ring from Shen. He was no longer an ordinary student anymore but the principal of the Master Teacher Academy. If he didn't deal with someone who had attempted to provoke him promptly, that could potentially undermine the authority of the Master Teacher Academy. Furthermore, that would also be driving the two clans into a corner. Putting everything aside, just considering his current influence and standing, if others were to know that the Shen clan and Liu clan had once offended him, who would still dare do business with them? Everyone would avoid them like the plague. That was how society worked. One's actions must be aligned with one's standing, or else there would only be chaos. After taking the storage ring, Zhongxian swiftly looked over the contents within and saw innumerable treasures. Just looking at the high-tier spirit stones by themselves, there were already more than 500 of them. These two clans sure are generous. Zhongxian was astounded. This wasn't a small number of high-tier spirit stones. Even the Hongyuan royal family would have to tighten their budget significantly for the next few decades if they were to take out such a sum from their treasury. The fact that the two clans were able to fork out such a sum easily reflected the extent of their strong foundations. The Shen clan has businesses all over Hongyuan Empire, and they trade frequently with Qingyuan conferred empire as well. Over the years, they have accumulated great wealth, and in terms of liquid assets, perhaps even our royal family can't compete with them. Noticing Zhongxian's astonishment, Shen Yuqing discreetly sent a message through Zhenqi telepathy to him. They are even wealthier than the royal family. Zhongxian was truly shocked this time around. It was no wonder Shen Jun could afford to take out 2 high-tier spirit stones each for him and Luo Chichi to serve as welcome gifts. One must know that this was something that Xing Yuan and Yu Fei could not afford to do. So, it turned out that he was from a truly wealthy clan. That explained everything. Since they specialize in running businesses, and they have connections with Qingyuan Empire, perhaps I can use their help. Recalling his previous intentions, Zhongxian's eyes suddenly lit up. Currently, he was severely lacking high-tier spirit stones. While he had obtained a huge pile of resources from the beasts of the Cloud Mist Ridge, he didn't have the connections and means to sell them. However, if he could tap into the connections of the Shen clan, it shouldn't be too difficult to sell his items. In any case, it would be far easier than fumbling his way around it alone. I will be accepting your items then. Zhongxian nodded and put away the storage ring before turning his gaze back to Shen Wanting once more. Clan head Shen and clan head Liu, I happen to have something that I may require your help on. Shen Wanting and Liu Xian's eyes lit up, and they quickly clasped their fists and replied, Principal Zhong, feel free to speak. As long as it is something within the means of our Shen clan and Liu clan, we will surely accomplish it. Their only fear was that Zhongxian would have nothing to ask of them. Only when the other party had a request to ask of them would they be able to forge a strong relationship with him. I believe you should have seen the situation at the inauguration ceremony back then. The beasts of the Cloud Mist Ridge have gifted me quite some stuff, but I don't really need most of it. Since the both of your clans have vast business connections, are you interested in selling my items for me? Zhongxian revealed his motive. This. We are more than willing to. Upon hearing the request, Shen Wanting and Liu Xian couldn't help but burst into delight. Considering that huge profits were involved in this dealing, the fact that the other party was willing to leave this matter to them meant that he was willing to cast aside their differences and trust them. That is good. Zhongxian nodded as he passed a storage ring over. The items that the beasts of the Cloud Mist Ridge had gifted him were in it. Even though these items were valuable, they weren't of much use to him. It would be much better for him to trade them for high-tier spirit stones to cultivate instead. In any case, the two clans had their foundations rooted in Hongyuan Empire, so they wouldn't dare play any tricks with the Master Teacher Academy looming over them. These items are highly sought after regardless of whether it is within Hongyuan Empire or the other empires. Principal Zhong, rest assured, we will surely sell all of it for you within 2 months. Shen Wanting said confidently. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.